Since I began my channel 3 years ago, the most requested topic I have gotten, without a doubt, are skinwalkers. There seems to be a fascination among the masses with the modern day boogeyman. Now, I have done an in-depth look into the lore and backstory of the Navajo Skinwalker legend. This video is focused on a more specific area of the Skinwalker legend, a place where these dark witches are said to roam wild, alongside other supernatural beasts of all shapes and sizes. In recent years, there have been many movies and documentaries made on this rural ranch in the middle of nowhere, Utah. This is the strange and true story behind the Skinwalker Ranch. Before I get into the meat and potatoes of this spine-tingling mystery, let's get acquainted with the basics of the ranch and a brief overview of the Navajo culture and the role skinwalkers play. Skinwalker Ranch, aka Sherman Ranch, is situated on roughly 488 acres of land. Safe to say, plenty of room for spooky stuff to happen. The ranch is located southeast of Ballard, Utah. Ballard is fairly well known for stories of UFOs and other paranormal anomalies. The name Skinwalker Ranch comes from the dark, malevolent witches of Navajo lore, skinwalkers. The Navajo Nation covers nearly 18 million acres, or roughly 27,413 miles. The Navajo Nation is located in the area known as the Four Corners in the southwest United States. The Navajo actually have retained the largest land area among any Native American tribe, which, if you ask me, is truly tragic in the first place. From Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico, the Navajo lived and respected the land. With all cultures, the Navajo did indeed have figures of good and evil. It is important to understand the role and meaning behind medicine men and skinwalkers. First and foremost, medicine men were spiritual healers and protectors of sorts. They also had knowledge of herbs and other various remedies for physical ailments as well. Skinwalkers are essentially anti-medicine men. Instead of healing, protection, and guidance, their purpose is to curse, maul, and torment. Ye, not Laci, the Navajo name for the skinwalker, has the ability to possess and disguise themselves as the animals around them. This is, of course, a crude and very brief introduction to what these entities are. If you would like a more in-depth exploration into skinwalkers themselves, check out my 20-minute long documentary on them. Now, let's get back to the ranch itself. Trying to pin down the start of the Skinwalker Ranch story is kind of hard, honestly. Between my reading from journalists, books, and research online, I could find that the most popular publicized claim seemed to have been in 1996. I do realize there are reports from around the area and history that shows people lived in the area before these 1990s reports, but the ranch itself didn't seem to get notable coverage until this time. I did find a timeline that shows a UFO sighting did occur in 1974, but this was 10 miles away from the ranch. The Desert News, a local Salt Lake City newspaper, and its counterpart, the Las Vegas Mercury, had begun publishing a series of articles from George Knapp. These stories claim that the Sherman family was experiencing some truly terrifying events that you could only imagine in the movies. This all started after they had recently purchased the ranch. For reasons unknown, the ranch was abandoned sometime in 1987. The property was vacant for upwards of 7 years, until 1994, when the Sherman family finally purchased it. Terry and Gwen Sherman, along with their 2 children, had thought they had found their dream home. A vast piece of land, a comfy house, and solitude. What more could you ask for? Terry was a cattle breeder, and was in the hopes that nearly 500 acres of land would give his livestock plenty of space to feed and roam. Not to mention, this could be the break he needed to take his livestock business to a higher status. Now, Terry had bought the ranch for a very good price, far cheaper than the land was worth. He was excited and honestly bewildered that no one else had jumped on the offer. Upon moving in, the Sherman family immediately noticed some odd things. They stated the number of deadbolts used to secure the home was insane. We're not talking about 1 or 2 deadbolts per door. We are talking 3, 4, maybe even 5 deadbolts on a single door. This also was the case for many of the windows as well. This was also the case for the doors on the inside of the home. They had found heavy metal chains attached to the walls, likely used to keep big dogs from escaping. The Sherman family initially thought the previous owners were just overly paranoid about home security. Well, they would soon find out that on the Skinwalker Ranch, you can never be too safe. I have found experiences and claims of UFOs around the area on the ranch itself before 1996. In the 1974 book, The Utah UFO Display, a scientist report written by Frank Salisbury and Joseph Hicks, this book details nearly 100 alleged experiences from the Oneida County region, where the Skinwalker Ranch just so happens to be. These experiences detailed stories of cattle vanishing into thin air and/or being found mutilated beyond all recognition. Sightings of UFOs and orbs were also mentioned numerous times, as well as sightings of creatures with blood-red piercing eyes. Apparently, even after being shot, these creatures were unhurt and seemingly unbothered. The mutilated cattle have been a part of the lore and area for decades. A retired U.S. Army Colonel, John B. Alexander, had conducted scientific investigations on the ranch, which revealed mixed results. Getting back to the Sherman family, they mentioned upon signing the paperwork they had noticed a lot of strange things in the agreements. One interesting thing was that the Sherman family was not allowed to dig on the land without approval from the previous owners, which, if you ask me, is incredibly strange and makes me think of the amount of potential dead bodies buried out there more than spooky paranormal stuff, but I digress. Even though everything felt weird, the family went through with the purchase anyway. According to Terry Sherman, things got strange almost immediately. Literally, on the first day the family was moving in, they noticed a figure off in the distance in their southern pasture. As they observed closer, they could tell that it was a wolf. It was moving rather quickly in an odd S formation. This, of course, put the family on alert. Maybe not for the simple fact that wolves lived in the area, but the size of this wolf, according to Terry Sherman, was impressive, to say the least. Terry firmly believes it was around 3 times the size of a normal wolf. At first, the wolf seemed friendly and non-threatening to the family. It approached them calmly and slowly. All the livestock seemed to be terrified. All but one curious calf, that is. This baby calf had its head sticking out between the metal bars of the fence. In what seemed like a split second, the wolf quickly ran towards the calf and attacked it brutally. Snapping its large jaws down on this calf's head, the wolf tried to drag the calf out of the pen. In a moment of bravery, Terry ran to his truck and grabbed an axe. He began to attack the animal and kicking its back legs to no avail. The wolf would just not let go of the calf. Terry yelled to his son to grab his .357 Magnum and bring it to him. Terry had shot at the wolf, apparently hitting it in the abdomen area. Even after being shot, this wolf would still not let go of the calf. It almost seemed as if this wolf was bulletproof. It apparently did not yelp or show any indication that it had just been shot, nearly point blank. Terry fired another shot at this rabid wolf, but again, nothing seemed to be bothering this monstrosity. Finally, after shooting this beast for a 3rd time, it finally backed off, slowly. This, of course, had everyone freaked out and uncomfortable. What animal could realistically take multiple shots from a .357 Magnum and still be standing just fine? Upon further observation, Terry could not notice any wound or blood on his coat anywhere. Apparently, a 4th shot was taken and the wolf began to retreat more. Terry was concerned this wolf may be thinking about attacking the calf again, and since he clearly can't protect his livestock, he is terrified of that outcome. At this point, Terry called for his son to bring him his .30-06 rifle from inside the house. His son returned in no less than a minute's time. Terry quickly took aim and fired at the beast, but instead of dropping dead or even running away, this wolf just looked back at Terry like it was annoyed more than anything. Rightfully freaked out past the point of no return, Terry lets off another shot, and this time can clearly see a piece of flesh rip off the wolf as it hits it this time. This still did not seem to faze the wolf in the slightest. After this, the wolf would look at the calf and then back at Terry, and proceed to run off back the way it had come from. Terry knew he couldn't just let this large wolf roam his land. He and his son strapped up and went after the beast. They tracked the wolf for nearly 2 hours, catching small glimpses of it, running between trees and patches of woods. They came across a muddy bank, where they found many of the wolf's paw prints. They followed them until they abruptly ended in the middle of the mud bank. This had perplexed Terry to such a degree that he questioned everything he knew. The wolf would have to jump 50 yards or so to have avoided leaving more tracks, which is just ludicrous. Wolves can typically jump up to 15 feet long and roughly 12 feet high, so jumping 50 yards or 150 feet is a real superhuman feat. This wolf had just vanished. After returning back home, Terry had picked up the piece of flesh he had shot off the beast. Terry noted that the meat was not fresh at all. Rather, it had looked and smelled rotten and putrid, almost as if it had been out in the sun for days on end. Terry, to this day, still questions what happened to him that day. Now, this was just the first day. I could sit here for hours retelling the plethora of stories the Sherman family claimed to have experienced. You can find those stories in the various books, documentaries, and films centered around this ranch. I wanted to relay this one in this video, as it is personally my favorite story from the Skinwalker Ranch legend. If you have seen any of the films or read the books, you will know this strange wolf shows up more than a few times. I also wanted to share a few shorter stories that really stuck out to me. Aside from little experiences, such as unpacking groceries and leaving the room to come back to find them all back out again, and things from the family just up and vanishing, Gwen Sherman reported some seriously creepy stuff happening. She initially brushed it off as her going insane. These small events were leading Gwen to worry about the state of her memory. Gwen and other members of the family claimed to have seen tall, dark entities peering in from the windows at night, eventually even entering the home and watching them at the end of their beds. Aside from some serious poltergeist activity happening within the house, the mutilations of cows, strange lights in the sky, and even odd noises that would come from the ground, sounding almost like explosions. These events only continued to get worse and worse around the property. The noises from the ground interest me a lot, simply because neighbors claim to have heard them as well, adding just a bit more validity to the claim in my opinion. To make things even worse, the Shermans had been seeing strange creatures all over their land. These creatures would range from Bigfoot to almost ungodly looking. Apparently, nightmarish werewolf hyena-like creatures would ravage their livestock and vanish into thin air seemingly. I could go on and on about these happenings. It seems to honestly never end. I have found a very interesting and captivating video series on a majority of these smaller events compiled by a channel named Bedtime Stories. I would highly recommend checking out their coverage of the Skinwalker Ranch events. Eventually, in 1996, the property was sold to NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science, after the Sherman family could no longer stand the terrifying events and the financial ruin they were in from it. NIDS is a rather interesting group that focuses on the fringe sciences of the world, a group of highly respected and educated scientists who approach the world of the supernatural with a skeptic mind, but are open to what results may reveal. Let's get into some of the more boring details here. These details may be boring to those looking for a supernatural thriller, but there was actually a whole new mystery behind who recently purchased the land and what they were using the land for. Robert Bigelow, the business guru behind the Budget Inn motel chain, Bigelow Aerospace, and NIDS, bought the ranch for just $200,000. Bigelow claims he was convinced to buy the ranch after hearing the stories of mutilation, strange lights, and weird markings in the earth told to him by the previous owner, Terry Sherman. Bigelow allowed several studies to be carried out on the property, treating the ranch as an open laboratory of sorts. Initially, Bigelow stated he thought secret military machinery was responsible for the torment of the Shermans. Ultimately, though, it seemed to only fuel the legend more than providing any real answers. There seems to be a lack of information on what he had been doing and what studies had been going on there for the past 20 years. In 2016, Bigelow sold the ranch for a whopping $4.5 million to an unknown corporation simply named Adamtanium Holdings. That is one serious return on his original $200,000 investment. The biggest question I have, though, is what was happening for the past 20 years? What research was being done, if any? This is where the state of the Skinwalker Ranch truly becomes odd. Not to say a property known for strange and supernatural events isn't odd in itself, but once Adamantium Holdings came into ownership, so did a shadow of secrecy. As far as I can tell, this holding company is a shell corporation, and their origins are, well, rather unknown. A shell corporation, for those who are unaware, are corporations that technically only exist on paper. They have no real employees or office space, but have a bank account or passive investments like intellectual property rights or IP rights. Essentially, intellectual property rights to your favorite show or character. These passive investments make them money, thus technically making them a business. When this holding company purchased the property, they closed off all entrances with gates and signs. This is where things seemingly explode on the ranch. According to Robert Bigelow, he only agreed to sell the property as long as the research continued. Shortly after, it seemed the activity increased tenfold. Images of alleged UFOs have been taken over the homestead, and sightings of lights and creatures have stayed steady. The mystery of exactly who spent $4.5 million on the ranch still remained, though. That is, until recently. Sometime in 2017, the trademark for Skinwalker Ranch was filed for and was obtained in 2018. After a long-standing mystery, Brandon Fugel came out as the owner of the ranch. Brandon is a real estate tycoon and seems to be using this as publicity. The question still remains, why is the ranch suddenly so secured? What are they doing out there? Does revealing the owner really change any of the decades-old mysteries said to come from the ranch? In my mind, no, not really. While knowing who owns the land is helpful for contact reasons, it really doesn't change the long history of unpleasant experiences on the land. In a recent documentary about the ranch, Hunt for the Skinwalker, the new owner says that he thinks people who don't believe there is something supernatural happening on the ranch are delusional. This gives me some hope that even though the ranch is highly secured these days, that research may still be going on inside those gates. Research into what, you might ask? I haven't the slightest idea. For a place so well known for the insane activity that would make the bravest explorers shite themselves, it seems the reports of skinwalkers are less common than you would expect. Many of the creature sightings have been attributed to skinwalkers though, as the surrounding natives would claim. What truly resides on the Skinwalker Ranch? What makes this location such a perfect breeding ground for the supernatural? We may never really know. But for now, we can continue to create theories that will keep us up at night.
How concerned does this make you to see the car here?
Well, I'm happy that we found it because I'm hoping that it'll give us some clues on where she might be. I don't know what to think. I mean, it's just at first it scares me because it's here.
The 1990s are fondly remembered by a lot of people. It seems many have nostalgic memories of the time. The 90s also marked the introduction of DNA and other similar investigation processes. There are, of course, a number of things that came with the 90s that are also sad. A number of cold cases came with the 90s as well. I recently found a case from 1995 that somehow remains unsolved. After reading the details surrounding this case, I felt compelled to research into this case more and share it with you all. This is the disturbing case of Anne Dunlap. It was December 30th, 1995, just after Christmas in Bloomington, Minnesota, when Anne Barbara Dunlap would suddenly go missing. Anne was 31 years old at the time and worked as a manager at Pillsbury. From what I could tell, this is the same Pillsbury brand from your local supermarkets. The timeline of events is a bit complicated in this story. It is hard to say when Anne went missing or where. There isn't too much information out there about her whereabouts before she was reported missing. According to Brad Dunlap, Anne's husband, she had left her parents' house where they were living at the time, sometime in the morning to meet her friends for lunch. She later returned at around 12 p.m. and then left again to go shopping at the mall at around 2:30 p.m. The mall she was alleged to have gone to is the Mall of America, which is a massive shopping mall that covers roughly 8 million square feet over multiple levels. Oddly enough though, police could not verify that Anne had been at the mall at all. They looked over security footage and questioned numerous employees of the mall. No one seemed to have seen her there. I should mention Brad did hire a private investigator at some point, and this PI claims at least 2 people claimed to have seen her there. Anne never returned home at 4:30 p.m. as she had planned. 2 days later, on January 1st, 1996, at around 8 a.m., Anne's maroon 1987 Toyota Celica was found in the parking lot of a Kmart located in a seedy part of Minneapolis. The car was left unlocked with the keys inside, which is odd to say the least. Tracking dogs were brought in immediately and tracked her sent back to the store, but this seemed to be where the trail ended. Officials towed Anne's car to investigate it further, and when they opened the trunk, they found a gruesome discovery. Police had found the body of Anne Dunlap. She had been stabbed multiple times, with several cuts to her throat. The police officer who discovered the body was quoted as saying, "There was a lot of blood." Reports mention her wedding ring was missing, and there were no signs of sexual assault. From what officials can put together, they believe Anne was knocked out or subdued in some way before being placed in the trunk and killed. With seemingly no motive, other than robbery, potentially due to the missing wedding ring, officials had a hard time coming up with suspects. They did, however, have one person in particular in their sights though. Brad Dunlap, Anne's husband who had seemingly been concerned with his wife's disappearance, was now a person of interest. Officials searched the family's home 3 different times. They found blood in the garage on the floor and door. Anne's parents claimed they both cut their hands that week and the blood could be theirs. Some recent updates to this case actually prove that wrong though. A recent test of the blood has shown 3 of the spots to match Anne and not the other members of the family. Brad did give a 5-hour interview with the police shortly after his wife was found. Essentially, Brad denied killing his wife or having anything to do with it. He refused to tell police where he was the hours before Anne's disappearance and directs all contact to his attorney. It definitely seems a bit odd, but he was very involved in the searches for her. After his interview, he returned to the home of Anne's parents and informed them Anne was dead and the police think he did it. Anne's parents have always maintained their opinion that Brad is innocent. Brad's alibi is that he was running errands at the time. He claimed to have gone to a tropical fish store in Plymouth, Minnesota, to get supplies, but he claimed the store was closed when he got there. This, however, was refuted by the owner who claimed the store closed at 5 p.m. that day and that Brad Dunlap had never stopped by at all. If Brad had gone to the store sometime between 2 and 4, how would it have been closed? Officials also learned he had made a purchase at Big Top Liquors at around 5:30 p.m. Police did find a key piece of evidence that wouldn't normally seem to be important. They found a water bottle in Anne's car that had a unique price tag on it. At this point, most places had switched over to using barcodes and such, but the store this bottle of water was purchased from was still using the classic price tags. Police tracked down this store and interviewed the clerk who claimed they had sold the bottle of water to Brad Dunlap at around 6 p.m. that day. Now, officials did take a look at the poor quality security footage and did believe the person who bought the water did indeed look like Brad Dunlap. The footage was described as very grainy though, so I would suggest we take this piece with a grain of salt. This sadly seems to be where the investigation fades into a cold case. An unknown investigator was apparently quoted as saying this case would never be solved. It seemed later that year though, another investigator would come out and say this case would be solved and could be solved, and that Brad is still very much a suspect. Brad Dunlap was the sole beneficiary of 2 insurance policies that would pay out $1 million to him. After Anne's death, Brad and his attorney would begin a brutal legal dispute with Chubb Insurance Company of America. They refused to pay out the money because they suspected Brad had purposely killed his wife in order to collect on the policy. Brad then sued Chubb and Anne's estate. During the court hearings, Chubb disclosed they had received information from the investigators working on the case. The information among these documents they received showed damning evidence against Brad. The court ruled that this information was received privately, and that to make the playing field fair, they would have to make the information public. Brad would go on to claim the reason he increased the policy just before Anne's death was because of the house they had been building. This is also why they were living at Anne's parents' house at the time. After a long, grueling court process, Brad Dunlap and Chubb settled for around $600,000 to be paid out to Brad. This case remains unsolved. The story of Anne Dunlap's death may never be known. Or will it? This court case between Brad and Chubb released a lot of information that actually reopened the case. Officials are looking into Brad heavily. They 100% believe Brad Dunlap had killed his wife to collect on the insurance money. This, of course, is just a theory until proven without a shadow of a doubt.
In this affidavit, Voss outlined the evidence, calling Brad the only plausible suspect, claiming his motive was to cash in on $1 million in life insurance.
The murder was never solved, so here at Minneapolis Police Headquarters, the case files are still confidential. But across the street, here at federal court, documents have been released with stunning new details. It's part of a decades-old lawsuit in which a life insurance company argued it should not have to pay Anne Dunlap's husband.
Something else never reported before. A blood-stained fireplace log found in the garage. A lab report says that blood matched Anne's DNA.
There are so many questions I have in this case. While piecing together this story through articles and blogs online, I found so many holes in the story that I just had to make a section in this video just going over the many questions and potential theories involved in this case. My first and main question is, what was Anne and Brad's life like before they began the construction of this new house? And when did they move into Anne's parents' house? During the investigation, I constantly kept asking myself, did Anne have a cell phone or anything like that? I know back in 1995, cell phones were not what we know them to be today, but I would like to know if she had something like that and to see if there was any activity we could trace from it. Officials say Anne had her throat cut many times. What type of knife do they think was used? I did see they found a piece of a pocket knife. Police suspect it was a sheep's foot blade. They found this piece inside of Anne. Knowing the type of knife used in the crime could really help us profile the killer. Autopsies show that she had been struck with a blunt object, which would explain why she had no defensive wounds. Her DNA was also found on a log in the garage of the home. Was she killed in the garage or somewhere else around the house? My last question is the travel for that day. Brad seemed to be driving around the area where their house was being built a lot that day. Could he have potentially killed Anne out there and returned her body to where it was found? I also want to note that apparently he had told the police to check that Kmart that her body was found at. Ultimately, I hope with all the recent updates and the investigation reopening that we can help solve this case. Anne and her family deserve closure and answers. With so many details seemingly pointing at Brad Dunlap, it is hard to look in any other direction for answers. Police have investigated other suspects though, so police are not 100% ruling out anything. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this case, please be sure to give it a like and share this video with your friends. The more eyes we can get on these cases, the better chance we have to solve them. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us and subscribe? Turn on notifications to never miss a new video. I upload new videos almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. I'd love to know your thoughts on this case. What do you think happened to Anne Dunlap? I'd love to see your thoughts in the comments down below. If you have any information that could potentially help move this case forward, please contact the Minneapolis Police Department tip line at 612-692-8477. With much of the information on this case being deleted from the internet, any information, even just sharing this video, is very vital to help solving this case. Please spread the word. If you're not aware, you can download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and wherever else you listen to your podcast. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.
Pretty sick. And they're still out there.
Now in their mid-80s, Don and Louise Barber are reminded every new year of what happened to their 31-year-old daughter, Anne. The Barbers would like to see the killer brought to justice while they're still alive.
And it would be a load off our dear Brad. Our son-in-law has gone through so much because of it.
And of course, around here was tough. He was running around the lake and somebody spit on him and called him a bastard. And we would take him out to a restaurant and all these people would be looking at you and pointing, and it was, so he had to leave town. It was unbearable.
Definitely,
he is like another son.
Yes.
He is definitely another son. We love him dearly.
Frustrated that police put all their focus on Brad, the Barbers say they've given up hope police will solve the case. But it would be a welcome surprise.
Oh, would it ever?
It would be wonderful.
There are many mysteries on the internet involving strange and unexplained sounds. From the infamous bloop captured in the depths of the Pacific Ocean to the strange anomalous trumpet sounds coming from the skies above. Where would one even start their exploration of such an odd phenomenon? Well, after many hours of searching through these mysteries, I decided to cover a recent unsolved case of odd noises. This case, however, involved the weaponization of said sound. This is the unsolved phenomenon of Havana syndrome. In 1961, the US severed diplomatic ties with Cuba, and thus began a long and tense relationship between the two countries. However, in 2015, the United States and Cuba re-established relations. A US embassy was opened in Havana, the capital of Cuba. At first, everything was going as planned, aside from the usual diplomacy drama that comes with these types of relations. That all would seemingly change out of the blue sometime around November of 2016. An American CIA agent, with many years of experience under their belt, will be the first victim of this mysterious illness. The agent claimed they began hearing a loud, insect-like buzzing noise outside his apartment, together with a strange feeling of pressure in his head. It grew so loud, the agent went around closing all the windows trying to deafen the sound. This agent began to suffer incredible headaches and dizzy spells. Medical attention would be sought out with nothing notable coming from it. there is a fairly popular recording of the sound, which can be found online. Due to this being an allegedly dangerous sound, I will only play a very short snippet to give you an idea of what it sounds like. Please be advised. The United States government would be notified about this, but since it seemed to be an isolated incident with no other victims reported, no further investigation was put forth. A couple of months later, in January 2017, the same CIA agent once again visited the U.S. Embassy medical facility due to some symptoms occurring again. 1 month later, 2 more CIA agents reported hearing the same noises and experiencing similar symptoms. The injuries reported were all very serious. Mainly, they all shared inner ear injuries after hearing these noises. Motor issues, headaches, dizzy spells, tinnitus, and vertigo were also reported symptoms of this mysterious sound. This would change the tune of the ongoing investigation into the strange sound. The U.S. Embassy made several complaints to the Cuban government, suggesting these incidents were likely an attack on their embassy. Of course, the Cuban government denied any involvement in this event. Even until this very day, the Cuban government remains firm on its claim of innocence. Unfortunately, there was no proof found by the US government. They were even investigated by the Russian government as well, to no avail. The only evidence was the reports from the CIA agents. Medical tests were run on the agents. It is unclear if anything was found, but it is implied injuries did occur to the agents in an odd and unexplained fashion. Of course, we should take this with a grain of salt, simply because this is not 100% fact. In March of 2017, the U.S. Embassy began to inform the staff and residents of the embassy about the events. After this, many more people would be coming forward with their symptoms, some of which never even heard the sound being reported before. It wasn't only CIA agents being affected by this mysterious illness, though. Many of the State Department staff were also experiencing symptoms and hearing the odd sounds. Upwards of 16 CIA and embassy employees were reported to have been affected. The CIA would hire a doctor to evaluate the victims and investigate the matter. This doctor, however, would also fall victim to this unknown ailment. Time would pass, and sometime in July of 2017, an important meeting of medical professionals was held in Washington, D.C. There, they went over all the symptoms reported. They noted that in addition to the inner ear injury-like symptoms, victims also suffered from sleeplessness, nausea, fainting, vision problems, and cognitive issues such as memory loss and hard time holding concentration. These symptoms were sometimes so severe that they would affect people's day-to-day functioning. These symptoms would remain lingering for months after exposure to the sound. After this meeting, it was thought that these injuries were more closely resembling something like a concussion more than anything else. Sadly, investigations were slowed by the CIA's secrecy, as multiple of the affected CIA agents were active under diplomatic cover. This also makes it incredibly hard when trying to document just how many victims there actually are. From what I have found online, there are somewhere around 26 staff members affected by this. Their family members were also reported to have been affected as well, so this number could be drastically higher. August 2017, a media frenzy would flare up as the mainstream media became aware of these alleged attacks.
It reads like a Cold War spy novel. One government official saying the incidents were so severe that some U.S. diplomats needed to get hearing aids. It comes as the relations between the U.S. and Cuba had started to improve, but now the future of diplomacy between the two countries seems uncertain.
It is a cause of great concern for us. It's caused a variety of physical symptoms in these American citizens who work for the U.S. government. We take those incidents very seriously, and there is an investigation currently underway.
The US government was very vague with the details, further plunging this event into the depths of mystery. At first, they only claimed State Department officials were affected by the illness. Soon after, though, officials would learn of similar attacks geared towards Canadian officials as well. Most notably, a diplomat and his family, whose children were reported to have repeated nosebleeds after the sounds occurred.
The mysterious symptoms first struck nearly 2 years ago in Havana, after many say a piercing sound rang out. 5 Canadian diplomats and their families, including 7 young children, fell ill.
I had strong nausea. I had some dizziness. Sometimes I threw up. A few times I stood up and my nose was streaming with blood.
Symptoms of a concussion without any physical blow. This diplomat says the federal government dropped the ball, didn't move fast enough to get them out.
Sometime in February of 2018, a group of physicians at the University of Pennsylvania would examine the victims and publish an article reporting the results of their MRI scans. Initially, readers of the article were on the fence, suggesting it could be the result of psychological issues or mass hysteria. Even after all of this would come to light, the United States was still left floating idly in the water with this investigation. There were a plethora of theories from experts as to what could cause these attacks. Some speculated that some sort of weapon that emitted radio or electromagnetic waves could be the culprit. No one could prove this, however, so this is once again just a working theory. In September 2017, any non-essential staff was sent home from the Havana embassy. Not too long after, Canadian officials also removed a large number of their staff. As of 2019, more than half of Canada's staff had been withdrawn from Cuba. The Canadians had 14 cases of their own, meaning there would be around 40 or so attacks reported so far, more than just a one-off coincidence. This actually doesn't end here though. There are actual reports of similar attacks outside of Cuba as well. In March 2018, the mother of an employee at the consulate in Guangzhou, China, reported her mother was affected. Although the US government has not confirmed this as a case linked to the Havana syndrome phenomenon, it still had the US concerned enough to issue a public travel advisory nationwide. It took some time, but I did find more information on this case. There were wide-scale preliminary tests done to US diplomatic staff in China, where 15 potential victims were identified. One detail that stuck out to me though, the Guangzhou victim mentioned that her dogs were affected as well, displaying behavior such as throwing up blood and barking at things that weren't there. Many victims claim the government is trying to cover this up and hide the fact that something more nefarious is going on. This leaves us with many more questions and answers at the end of the day. This seems to be the end of the story so far, but this is an ongoing story that will more than likely see more updates in the coming years. Recently, documentaries have been made about the event by Canadian television companies, not to mention the countless YouTube videos and online articles detailing the events. It is incredibly nerve-wracking to know that we could be attacked at any time by someone or something you can't even see. One last update before we come to our conclusion. In July 2019, a new study was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. This study detailed advanced brain imaging techniques and compared over 40 brains of US staff victims. This study found some truly interesting details. This study found much less brain matter in the affected sample compared to the controlled one. They also found problems in the functional connectivity parts of the brain that help process sound and light. This has to lead many to think that Havana syndrome is something more than a psychological event. There are many theories as to what or who is causing this phenomenon. Many speculate the Cubans could be responsible. Others claim the Russians or Chinese are to blame. Some think it's an environmental anomaly, and there are those who claim this is nothing more than an accident or a hoax. It seems the most popular theories as to what is causing this syndrome all lead back to some sort of radio, sonic, or microwave being used to target specific targets in a concentrated manner. There are less popular theories such as viral virus, existing brain injuries, malfunctioning equipment of some kind, or even just a very loud insect, such as cicadas or crickets. The last one seems a bit less plausible in my opinion, as I have personally spent many weeks surrounded by thousands of cicadas, buzzing about all day and night, and never experienced any of these symptoms. Not to say these things couldn't happen, just seems weird. At this moment in time, the phenomenon known as Havana syndrome remains a complete mystery, and for the foreseeable future, it will stay that way. Aside from the first-hand accounts and physical evidence from a plethora of victims, we are no closer to figuring this out.
President Trump actually rolled back parts of President Obama's policy toward Cuba, though some elements remained in place, including the reopening of the U.S. Embassy in Havana. The Florida Senator Marco Rubio, whose parents fled Cuba, weighed in on this topic, saying personal harm to U.S. officials shows the extent the Castro regime will go and clearly violates international norms.
Thanks for watching this video. The mystery surrounding the strange Havana syndrome attacks are genuinely terrifying. Nothing scares me more than an enemy you can't see. What are your opinions on this case? Who or what do you think is responsible for this Havana syndrome? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this case, please be sure to hit that like button. It helps me out more than you can imagine. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us and subscribe? Turn on notifications to never miss a new video. I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. If you aren't aware, you can download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and pretty much every other major podcast provider. Thanks for always supporting the swamp, my friends. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.
In a statement of claim filed today, they allege Canada downplayed the seriousness of the situation, hoarded and concealed critical health and safety information, and gave false, misleading, and incomplete information to diplomatic staff. Last April, Canada stopped sending diplomats with families to Havana, but only last month did it reduce its staff there by half, more than a year after the Americans did the same for their diplomats with the same symptoms.
It is entirely too selfish for me to defend myself amongst these accusations when Laci's missing, and all of the media time should be spent towards finding her, and all of our energy should be spent towards finding her. Unfortunately, suspicion about me has risen to such a degree that I think people have stopped to look for Laci. They've stopped and lost that, and that's why I'm interested in being in the media now.
From time to time, I find myself looking into cases centered around families. There seems to be a concerningly large amount of spouse-turned-killer cases out there. These cases intrigue me in a unique way. For whatever reason, there just seems to be something about a husband or wife killing their spouse or even their child that just makes me feel sick. The very people you love and cherish more than anything in this world. How can someone go so far to take the life of their lover and child? In this documentary, I will be covering a case that fits this exact scenario. This case honestly reminded me a lot of the Dunlap case I covered not too long ago. This is the disturbing story of who killed Lacy Peterson and her unborn child. Before I jump right into the sad and tragic details of this unfortunate crime, I feel it is important that I share some information about Lacy Peterson and who she was. Lacy Denise Rocha, also known as Lacy Peterson, was born on May 4th, 1975 in Modesto, California. She was raised on her family's dairy farm in Escalation, California. Escalation is a small town with a little more than 7,000 residents. Lacy spent much of her younger life working on the farm and enjoyed gardening with her mother, something she continued to do throughout her life. Unfortunately, early on in Lacy's life, her parents got a divorce. Laci moved with her mother to Modesto and visited her father on the farm on the weekends. Laci was a very athletic teenager, participating as a cheerleader in the middle school that she went to and the high school. Laci would go on to study and major in ornamental horticulture, which, for those who aren't familiar, is the agriculture of plants and how to apply them to your everyday life. She studied at California Polytechnic State University, which is one of only 2 polytechnic universities in the state. Laci would often hang out at a place called Pacific Cafe, where one of her friends worked. Here is where the story begins, because it is at this cafe Laci would meet Scott Peterson. It was mid-1994, and Laci had made the first move. She had given Scott her number and told her mom that same day that she had likely met the man she would marry. Scott and Laci began talking and going out on dates together. Their first date was a deep-sea fishing trip, where apparently Laci got very seasick. As the couple's relationship got more serious, the two began to set aside their dreams to create a life together. Scott put aside his professional golf ambitions and focused on a more reachable business path. After 2 years of dating, the two moved in together. At the time, Scott was finishing his senior year of university, and Laci was working in a nearby town called Prunedale. This seems to mark the start of Scott's extramarital affairs. Apparently, at this time, Scott had at least 2 affairs on the side of his relationship with Laci. It is unclear what the relationships were like, or who they were with. After Scott graduated, Scott and Laci got married in Avila Valley on August 9, 1997. The following year, in June 1998, Laci graduated with a bachelor's degree in agricultural business. Not long after this, the couple opened a sports bar named The Shack in San Luis Obispo. The business started slow, but did eventually start booming on the weekends. The Petersons would sell the shack and move back to Laci's hometown of Modesto. They had purchased a beautiful 3-bedroom bungalow house for around $177,000. Laci would take a job as a part-time substitute teacher, and Scott would work at TradeCorp USA, a newly founded American branch of a European fertilizer company. Scott made quite a comfortable living from this as well. According to Laci's family and friends, she was the ideal housewife who was always cooking, cleaning, or doing something to help out. When Laci found out she was pregnant in 2002, it seemed to be a welcome surprise by everyone. Laci was set to give birth on February 16, 2003, and they were set to have a boy. The couple planned to name their son Connor. Sometime in November 2002, when Laci was 7 months pregnant, Scott met Amber Fry, who was a massage therapist in Fresno. Scott and Amber began having an affair. Amber was unaware of Scott's marriage and soon-to-be newborn child. Less than a month after this affair began, Laci would seemingly vanish into thin air on a 3-day weekend the couple spent together in Carmel, California, the week before Christmas. Carmel, from personal experience, is an absolutely beautiful area. I would definitely recommend checking out the Point Lobos area if you ever get the chance. Aside from Scott Peterson, the last people known to have spoken to Laci before she seemingly vanished were her sister, Amy Rocha, and her mother, Sharon Rocha. Now, I am going to try my best to piece together a timeline of her last known whereabouts. On December 23, 2002, around 5:45 p.m., Laci and Scott went to Amy Rocha's salon, simply named Salon, and Scott had his hair cut. During this time, Amy claimed Scott offered to pick up a fruit basket for her that she had ordered since he would be playing golf in the area anyway. Scott really seemed to want people to know that he was playing golf that day, because according to officials, he had told multiple other people he would be doing so that day. Sharon called her daughter that night at 8:30 p.m. and talked with her. This would unknowingly be the last time she would ever speak to Laci. Scott would go on to claim he had seen Laci the next morning at around 9:30 a.m. on December 24th. He claimed he was golfing, but apparently changed his story to fishing at the Berkeley Marina rather quickly. According to Scott, Stacy was watching a cooking show of some sort while he was leaving. She was doing chores and preparing to walk the dog at a nearby park. At this point, Laci would have been about 8.5 months pregnant. The biased side of me absolutely hates that she would have been doing that much work while being that pregnant, and he was just going off to fish. This would be the last official known whereabouts of Laci. The next day, the neighbor had come knocking as she had found the Petersons' dog, Mackenzie. This neighbor said she found the dog around 10:30 a.m. Another neighbor would come forward to say he saw Mackenzie at around 10:45 a.m. as well, as he was playing with his own dog. An unknown person reported to the Modesto Bee that the dog was found with a muddy leash and was returned to the Petersons' home. The neighbor who returned the dog claimed to see nothing out of the ordinary while doing so. Scott would return home from fishing and notice Laci was gone, and the dog was in the backyard with a muddy leash. Instead of calling the police or loved ones to find out where his 8.5-month pregnant wife was, he decided to take a shower and wash his clothes as they were wet from fishing. Scott reported his wife missing, but only after waiting until after 5 p.m. and calling his mother-in-law. Only then did Ron Gransky, Laci's stepfather, call the police and inform them of his daughter's situation. When police arrived at the home, they were met with a strangely calm Scott Peterson. He really didn't seem to be worried that his extremely pregnant wife was potentially missing and in danger. It's not like Laci was known to run out of the house unannounced, so you would think something out of the norm like this would cause some sort of emotional response. Police found Laci's purse and keys hanging up in the closet, and the dining room table had looked to be meticulously set for a family dinner, assumably for the following night. There was one thing that a detective noticed that disturbed him though. On the table, a phone book was open to a page with a full-page ad for a defense lawyer. Now this could be a coincidence, but it is also fair to look at this with a bit of suspicion. As I mentioned before, the police were put off by how calm Scott seemed to be. I know a lot of people make the point that everyone reacts differently in these situations, but we need to be a bit realistic with ourselves. If you had a baby who is due in 2 to 3 weeks, and your pregnant wife is missing, you would undoubtedly be upset, would you not? Despite these weird feelings and Laci's family thinking Scott was guilty from the start, hundreds of searchers volunteered to help find Laci. Modesto police and firefighters searched along Dry Creek, which was the area the Petersons' dog was found. A $25,000 reward was offered and was even increased to $250,000, and even increased once more to $500,000 for any information leading to Laci's whereabouts. A candlelight vigil was held on December 30th to garner more attention to the case. Hundreds of posters, blue and yellow ribbons, and even a website were made and circulated around the area. According to the Wikipedia page on Laci's case, upwards of 1,500 people volunteered to help pass out materials. This is where things start to get pretty sick. On the way to his missing wife's vigil, Scott called Amber Fry and made up some weird elaborate lie that he was on his way to France and was planning on being in Paris for New Year's Eve. He even gave her a fake European phone number that actually just rerouted to his current cell phone number. Scott was quoted as saying, "You know, in my mind, we could be wonderful together for the rest of our lives," on this phone call. The very next day, Scott called Amber to worship how beautiful she was and to tell her he was in Paris. Unknown to him though, Amber had already sold him out to the police and turned into an informant. Every conversation they had been having over the past week or so had been taped. Amber had found out about Scott's wife and other life about a week after Laci had been reported missing. She mentioned her friend showed her a video of Scott asking for information about his wife's location on TV. When Amber confronted Scott about this, he tried to explain it away, but wasn't making too much sense, saying things like, "There are different kinds of loss, Amber," when being questioned about why he lied about the loss of his wife. Scott would go on to say Laci was, in fact, alive, and she was still in Modesto. This was a major bombshell. At least, so officials thought at the time. As I mentioned before, Laci's family was convinced from the start he had something to do with her disappearance. Their suspicions and fears were only amplified when they saw Amber come forward on TV. An interesting quote I found while reading articles online about the investigation mentions, "I saw more reaction out of Scott when he burned the goddarn chicken." I believe this is a quote from Laci's cousin. I mention this because it seems Scott did not begin to get emotional until he realized Amber was not okay with his lies. Scott tried his best to convince Amber that Laci was indeed aware of the affair and was okay with it. This claim has been heavily refuted by virtually everyone who knew Laci. There is a famous sit-down interview Scott did with Diane Sawyer, where he tries to double down on this point, but I am not sure anyone is buying it. In this same interview, Scott would go on to claim his marriage was, quote, glorious, as well as other interesting choice words.
I told Laci about the relationship. She knew about it, and it's important between us. And we'll continue to search for her and bring her home.
That's another problem people had a big issue with. A lot of Laci's family talked to me and friends saying, if Laci knew that you were having an affair, she would have said something to someone. She wouldn't have kept quiet about it.
I don't know if she mentioned it to anyone or not.
On April 13th, 2003, a couple walking their dog had stumbled upon something grisly. They had found a decomposing body, but the body they found was a surprisingly well-preserved body of a late-term male fetus. The area the body was discovered in was a marshy area in the San Francisco Bay, just north of Berkeley, not too far from where Scott claimed he had been fishing. Upon a closer look, the fetus had its umbilical cord still attached and looked to have been torn and not cut or clamped as the normal practice would be. For whatever reason, a judge sealed off the autopsy results, but I was able to find an Associated Press source that revealed multiple loops of nylon tape had been found around the fetus's neck, along with a nasty cut to the fetus's body. A day later, an unknown passerby was out for a walk when they found another body of a recently pregnant woman. She was wearing beige pants and a maternity bra. She was found washed up on the rocky shoreline of the bay, roughly a mile or so from where the fetus was found. The body was decomposed to the point of being nearly unrecognizable. The poor woman had been decapitated and her limbs were missing. A few days later, on April 18th, 2003, DNA results determined the bodies found were that of Lacy Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. The autopsies reported that Connor's skin was not decomposed at all, but the light side of his body had been mutilated. The placenta and umbilical cord were not found with the body, but elsewhere. Laci's cervix was intact, and the exact date of her death could not be determined. Laci looked to have suffered very severely from a beating. She had 2 cracked ribs, but the coroner could not say if these injuries occurred before or after she died. All eyes were on Scott Peterson at this point. Scott was arrested on April 18th, 2003, near a golf course where he claimed to have been meeting his brother and father. His naturally dark brown hair had been suddenly dyed blonde, and oddly, his car was full of miscellaneous items, which included $15,000 in cash, a ton of survival gear, camping equipment, several changes of clothes, 4 cell phones, 2 driver's licenses, one of which was his brother's, and funnily enough, a whopping 12 Viagra tablets. If this doesn't sound like someone trying to disappear and live off the grid, then I don't know what does. To be fair, Scott's father, Lee Peterson, did mention Scott used his brother's ID to get a discount at the golf course, and that Scott had begun to live in his car due to the media attention. Personally, from the reports, it seems his car was so full of stuff that it would be virtually impossible to live out of it, but I digress. Police saw this as an attempt at fleeing from the law. 3 days later, on April 21st, 2003, Scott was arraigned in Stanislaus County Superior Court and was charged with 2 felony counts of murder with premeditation and special circumstances. He, of course, pled not guilty, and his trial was moved to San Mateo County due to the number of people in Stanislaus County having a biased opinion. The trial began on June 1st, 2004, and after many months of grueling trial and testimony, Scott was convicted of first-degree murder for his wife's death and second-degree murder for the death of his unborn child. Scott Peterson was given the death sentence by Judge Alfred DeLucci, who was quoted as saying the murder of Lacy Peterson was cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous. Luckily for Scott, California rarely follows through with the death penalty. In March 2019, the California government issues a moratorium for all 737 prisoners on death row in California, including Peterson. Essentially, this postpones any and all executions until the current governor's tenure is done. This seemingly doesn't carry much weight though, since California hasn't gone through with an execution since 2006. There has been a ton of controversy surrounding this case. Like many other cases that gain national attention, there are always conflicting beliefs as to what really happened. As I was researching into this story, I found a very solid article by the New York Post that broke down why Scott was found guilty. To start, the bodies were found only a mile away from where Scott claimed to have been fishing. Scott was noted to have been smirking and smiling throughout the trial. Scott had told Amber Fry he had lost his wife 2 weeks before she even went missing. He exclusively referred to his missing son as Lacy's baby and never his own. He took multiple trips to San Francisco Bay around the time the bodies were found. He had $15,000 and a passport hidden in his car when he was arrested. His general lack of emotion or care for his wife's safety. Not all is lost though from this tragic story. Lacy and Connor Peterson's death led to the creation of a new law known as the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, also known as Lacy and Connor's Law. This act ensures that under federal law, any person who causes death or injury to an unborn child while in the commission of a crime upon a pregnant woman will be charged with a separate offense. In October 2005, a Superior Court judge denied Scott's right to collect a $250,000 life insurance policy. Under California state law, criminals may not profit from insurance policies. Instead, the money was given to Lacy's family, more specifically Lacy's mother, as she was the executor of her estate. In 2006, Sharon Rocha wrote a book for her daughter titled For Lacy, A Mother's Story of Love, Loss, and Justice, which became a #1 seller on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list. Sadly, there has been no more closure as to what exactly happened to Lacy Peterson. Why was she killed? Why was she killed in such a violent way? What would have possibly caused Scott to do this? Why not just divorce and move on? There are so many unanswered questions that still remain in this case. I just hope Lacy and Connor are resting in peace, and Scott gets what's truly coming for him.
He had tried to alter his appearance, dyeing his beard. He had cash, he had a weapon, camping paraphernalia, water purifiers, everything that looked like a man on the run.
He had way too much stuff to be just casually going out of town. That was being prepared to be on the run for a while. They catch him, they got him, they're taking him in. He says, I heard that there were bodies, tell me it wasn't them. He knows that it's them.
One last thing, if that's okay, about Lacy, because I know that you get really choked up when you talk about it. Tell me what you love about Lacy.
God, I think you can sum it up pretty easily with looking at her photograph. The photograph, her big smile in the press.
Because you guys met in college, or?
Yeah.
And tell me what connected you two right away. I know she's got a beautiful smile, but what linked you guys?
I don't know, just being able to complete each other. I think that's it.
Australia is known for many things, from jaw-dropping landscapes to scary beasts calling the country its home. But there are other infamous stories from the land down under. Today, I am going to share one of the most infamous unsolved cases of foul crime ever committed in Australia. Before I go any further though, I do feel the need to add a disclaimer. This video covers a case that deals with children and violence against them. This could be potentially triggering to those who are of lighter heart. Please be advised. Now, with all that out of the way, let's meet Australia's infamous Mr. Cruel. We've all heard one version or another of the classic urban legend of the unknown stranger stalking your home. Lurking around your family's home looking for a way in. Looking for a way to terrorize you and your loved ones. Well, for multiple families in Australia, this urban legend became all too agonizingly real. It was a seemingly normal early morning on August 22nd, 1987, when an unidentified man broke into a family home in Lower Plenty, located on the outskirts of Melbourne. This unknown man was readily armed with a knife and a gun. The man proceeded to attack the family. The man demanded the parents roll onto their stomachs, taking away their ability to retaliate against him, tying the parents up by their feet and their hands. At first, the man posed as a thief, simply wanting valuable belongings. The knots the man used are consistent with what sailors would use, potentially revealing this man has nautical experience. The man was already masked, wearing a cliché black ski mask. But he demanded them to go into their wardrobe, but not before blindfolding and gagging each with surgical tape that he had brought with him. He locked both parents in, threatening to kill them if they tried to escape. He made his way to the rest of the house. In the room next door, a 6-year-old boy was sleeping and unaware of the danger coming his way. The boy was luckily mostly unharmed. The man blindfolded and gagged the boy with the same surgical tape and then tied him to his bed, leaving him there as he proceeded to reveal his true intentions. He made his way into the next bedroom, where an 11-year-old girl lay defenseless from this pervert. For over 2 hours, this unknown man assaulted the girl, often taking breaks to explore the house and even making himself food at one point. After the man was done, he left the house with a box of classic records and a blue jacket stolen from the family. This would be the seed of a new urban legend, a legend of a cruel man, a man simply known as Mr. Cruel. After this awful crime, Melbourne police were called in and started investigating the crime. This was not going to be an easy case, however. This attack seemed entirely unprovoked, and the family couldn't think of anybody who would want to harm them. The crime didn't seem to match up with any current open cases at the time either. At the time, Melbourne had a reputation for being a very safe place. The unofficial slogan at the time was even the most livable city in the world. Of course, crime still occurs in the area, but compared to many other cities in the world, it had much lower crime rates. The first thing police did was attempt to pick apart the details of the attack. From the details we know, we can piece together a picture. Everyone but the daughter was bound and gagged and relatively unharmed. The daughter was assaulted over a span of 2 hours, which, over this time, the man also searched the house and stole records in a random coat. This seemingly makes no sense thus far, but more details would arise as the daughter began to share her story. She told investigators that during one of his breaks between assaulting her, he used the family's phone to call someone. This call seemingly sounded like an argument about moving children. He referred to this person as Bozo. The police checked the family's phone records but found no record of this happening at all. Sadly, this was before cell phones really were around. Investigators assumed this was a tactic of Mr. Cruel used to confuse them. Sadly, this case would run cold. Around a year later, tragedy would strike again. The circumstances escalated dramatically with this assault, though. What Mr. Cruel would do next would leave parents and children alike terrified to be alone. On December 27th, 1988, just a handful of days after Christmas, John Wills, his wife, and 4 daughters were sleeping in their Ringwood area home, not too far from the first assault's location. John was asleep when sometime around 5:45 a.m., he was awoken by an object being placed on his temple. John heard a whisper, "Don't be a hero," coming from an unknown intruder. This would be the start of a never-ending nightmare for John and his family. The intruder wore a blue ski mask, dark blue overalls, and held a knife and gun in both of his hands. John decided not to fight the intruder, as he may put his family in danger if he did. The man demanded John and his wife roll onto their stomachs and tie them by their hands and feet, just like the first crime. A similar knot was used as well, but to note it was not the same exact knot. They were blindfolded and gagged, as per usual for Mr. Cruel. He claimed he was only there for money and valuables, but as we've seen before, we know this not to be the case. The man stole a whopping $35 from the bedside table and proceeded to explore the rest of the home. He cut the phone lines and headed straight to the bedroom where the family's 4 daughters were. The man would wake up 10-year-old Sharon Wills by calling her name. He blindfolded her, gagged her, grabbed some of her clothes, and kidnapped her from the house. It took only 15 minutes or so for the parents to break free from their restraints. 15 minutes too late, unfortunately. Their oldest daughter, Sharon, was gone. With phone lines being cut, John ran as fast as he could to the nearest neighbor's house and called the police. He searched the neighborhood up and down trying to find Sharon. Sadly, nothing was found, and it seemed Sharon was truly gone, abducted by the boogeyman, Mr. Cruel. This was only the start of their nightmare, though. For over 18 hours, the Wills family were in a panicked state, worried sick about their 10-year-old daughter who could be potentially in a lot of danger. Then, a light at the end of the tunnel. Sometime after midnight, a woman accidentally found a little girl on a street corner. She was wrapped up in a green garbage bag. It was Sharon Wills. She had been abandoned by her abductor. Surprisingly, even after the nightmare she had been through, Sharon was in strong spirits, calm and collected. The woman that found her called the police, and the Wills family were all reunited. But the investigation into the assault was just beginning. Oddly, it turned up some surprising evidence, or rather, the lack there of any evidence for that matter. Sharon was blindfolded throughout the entire ordeal, so she wasn't able to give a solid physical description of the attacker, but she described him as a soft-spoken, rather upfront individual. He actually seemed to be somewhat caring of his victims, according to Sharon. This, of course, doesn't match up to the egregious crimes that he had just committed. So, investigators made note of it, as it may be of use when profiling this man later. One of the words Sharon used to describe him was gentle, which was also rather shocking to investigators. Further details surrounding Sharon's abduction back up her claims of Mr. Cruel being somewhat caring of his victims. Sharon was apparently fed a Vegemite sandwich and given lemonade. Shortly before being let go, Mr. Cruel had given the 10-year-old a very thorough cleaning, washing off any possible forensic evidence potentially left behind, also clipping her fingernails and toenails, brushing and flossing her teeth, and more. Essentially, destroying any possible chance of being caught. Mr. Cruel either kept Sharon's clothes or destroyed them, as they were never recovered. He dressed her in garbage bags and dropped her off at Baywater High School, just a few miles away from her home. Investigators easily connected this incident to the prior one in Lower Plenty, but they wouldn't make the details of that public for some time. Needless to say, everyone was plagued by fear, and a feeling of hysteria was beginning to take shape. Locals began calling this assailant the Hampton Rapist. John Wills took the assault very hard. He had guilt that he could have done more to protect his daughter. He had no way to know any of this would happen, though. and he eventually focused his energy on trying to solve the crime. Unfortunately, the investigation was a dead end and didn't seem to have much of anything. Almost no evidence was left behind or ever found, and none of it could be used to find one specific person. Many in the area began to theorize who this masked boogeyman was, but another more frightening question popped up. Who was next? It would be roughly 2 years before that heart-dropping answer would come. Canterbury, Victoria, lies just on the outskirts of Melbourne. It is not too far from Ringwood and Lower Plenty. It is another suburban area, closer to the center of Melbourne. The Linis family were a well-off English family who rented a house in the esteemed Monomeath Avenue. For those who are unaware, this is a rather high-end area where many Australian politicians and public officials live. The family moved to Australia for business purposes. The family was only living in the area for a temporary time though, preparing to move back to England in the near future. In fact, they had moved to this Melbourne area community specifically to raise their children safely, and were planning on making their move back home just a few days later. It was July 3rd, 1990. It was shortly before midnight when 15-year-old Fiona and 13-year-old Nicola were woken up by an angry masked intruder. He ordered Nicola into the next room to grab her school uniform. She attended the Presbyterian Ladies' College at the time. He tied up Fiona in her bed. The unknown man was armed with a gun and a knife, the trademark of Mr. Cruel. These two lone teenage girls stood no chance of fighting against this man. With the oldest girl bound, the man was able to make his escape without any hassle. What made this attack different is that Mr. Cruel told Fiona that her father would have to pay $25,000 for the return of Nicola. The man then stole the family's rental car and drove off with Nicola. Mr. Cruel drove for about 1 kilometer, and then they parked the car assumably to transfer to another car, effectively leaving investigators stumped. Less than 20 minutes later, Brian and Rosemary Linis would come home and find a nightmare. The police found almost no evidence from the crime scene itself. The intruder's kidnapping of Nicola had been done in a quick, tactical manner. Realizing the tough spot that they were in, with most missing person cases going cold just hours after the initial abduction, this meant they have to work quickly, or things would get very bad very quickly. Unlike the abduction of Sharon Wills, Nicola wasn't returned later that day. Around 36 hours after her abduction, her father Brian held a press conference in which he begged the abductor to return Nicola and stated his willingness to comply with the ransom any way that he could. But Mr. Cruel, living up to his name, demanded a ransom with no way to pay it. Police looked into Brian's work for any potential enemies or foul play going on. The police at the time thought maybe this ransom could be personal in nature. Luckily though, Nicola was found alive somewhere around 50 or so hours after being abducted. It also happened to be her 14th birthday. What a way to celebrate it. Nicola was found at an electricity station in Kew, just a short distance away from her home. Nicola was abandoned by the mysterious man. She was fully dressed at the time and wrapped up in a blanket. She told police her abductor had left her outside the station and told her to sit in a prone position until he drove away. Shortly after that, she removed her blindfold and called her father as soon as she could. Luck would be on investigators' side, as Nicola was able to provide the investigators with some details that were vital to their investigation. The most important detail was the estimation of Mr. Cruel's height. Apparently, he was roughly 5'8". She had guessed this by judging her own height to the attacker when he rushed her from her bedroom to the getaway car, and said that he wasn't much taller than herself. She also shared that the man likely had reddish-brown hair. Nicola also had vital information about the man's house and vehicle, most of which were basic, cliché details. Nicola had been blindfolded for the duration of her captivity, but had been given a few chances to get a glimpse of her surroundings. The man threatened Nicola, saying, "My freedom is worth more than your life," which sounded eerily similar to the threats given to Sharon Wills. A few more important details from Nicola's abduction. Apparently, she heard the man talking to another person. However, she never heard a reply from said person, potentially leading investigators to think an accomplice may have helped. When Nicola was flying back to England with her family, she noted the sound of the plane sounded similar to the sound she heard while at Mr. Cruel's house, meaning he must have been living in the area of the airport at the time. Now, the police had a rough idea of where he lived, how tall he was, and what type of personality he may have had, but it would be too little too late, as the worst had yet to come from Mr. Cruel. John and Phyllis Chan were two hard-working parents that worked roughly 18 hours a day to make sure they could take care of their children. Both were immigrants to Australia. The family owned 3 restaurants in the Eltham area of Victoria, as well as a few realty investments. The two parents didn't usually get home until midnight or later. They would quite often leave their 3 daughters home alone, trusting their 13-year-old daughter Carmen to watch over the younger 2. This would be a mistake, as unknowingly, Mr. Cruel must have been lurking, watching their every move. As detectives believe he would stake out his victims for weeks or even months at a time, learning their habits so he can exploit them to his advantage. It was April 13th, 1991, when terror would strike the Chan family. The family lived in what would be considered a very safe area, but no matter how safe you feel, Mr. Cruel violates all senses of comfort. It was a Saturday, normally a very busy day for the Chan parents, as weekends were the busiest for the family's business. Carmen and her 2 sisters were left alone, which on a Saturday night meant the 3 sisters would be watching movies and TV in Carmen's room together. Sometime around 8:40 p.m., Carmen and one of her sisters went to the family's kitchen to get something to eat. Suddenly, they were confronted by Mr. Cruel, wearing his trademarked ski mask and knife. "I only want your money," Mr. Cruel told the 3 girls, as he had said to his previous victims. He forced the 2 younger daughters into Carmen's closet. He claimed he only wanted Carmen to show him where the money was, and he pushed the bed in front of the closet so they couldn't get out, trapping the 2 girls as he abducted Carmen. It only took a couple of minutes before the girls broke free from their prison. They called their parents right away and alerted the police. By the time police arrived, they knew what had happened without having to investigate too much. Mr. Cruel had struck again. This attack had been planned, and that was evident from what was left in their driveway. Phyllis Chan's Toyota Camry had the words, "Payback, Asian drug dealer, more to come," on it. Police were able to discover Mr. Cruel entered the home through a slit window screen. They tracked his steps through the house, aided by tracking dogs. They tracked him up to 300 meters away before losing his scent in a vacant lot. He must have had his getaway car parked there. Hoping for the safe return of their daughter, the Chan family held a very emotional conference just 72 hours later. Here are a few audio clips from that conference.
Carmen, look, this is your favorite dress. You wear every day. Last Saturday, you left at home. You had to come home and wear it. That coat's waiting for you. You love the coat very much. Carmen, your sister needs you. Don't spoil my family, please. Take my daughter home safe. She loved her sister very much, and her mom, and then dad.
As you can hear, the family is absolutely distraught and just want the safe return of their beloved daughter. A few days later, the Chan family sent out an encrypted letter in the local newspaper, using a cipher that Carmen would have been able to decipher. They also offered to pay a ransom for the return of Carmen. Even Carmen's sisters were sending out letters pleading for mercy from Mr. Cruel. Unlike the other cases though, days, weeks, and even months went by with no sign of Carmen or Mr. Cruel. Unfortunately, the first responders to the Chan house botched the scene by not declaring the house as a crime scene, which effectively hindered the potential evidence left behind. There were dozens of police walking throughout the house and looking for leads before investigators could begin to look for clues of their own. Police looked very thoroughly through John Chan's personal and professional life, hoping to find some sort of connection to the message written on his wife's car. The writing on Chan's vehicle was likely nothing more than another bamboozle by Mr. Cruel to throw police off his path. One of the largest manhunts in Australian history, Operation Spectrum, was a multi-million-dollar undertaking that consumed tens of thousands of man-hours, along with many thousands of more volunteer hours, offering a $300,000 reward for any information leading to the capture of Mr. Cruel. The safe return of Carmen Chan was everyone's number one priority. Sadly, almost a year after Carmen's abduction, a man walking his dog around Edgar's Creek in Thomastown stumbled upon something odd. He curiously investigated the scene and was horrified at what he uncovered. The man would rush to contact police, and after an autopsy, it would reveal the fully decomposed skeleton was that of Carmen Chan. She had been shot 3 times in the head. From the looks of it, he killed her execution style. From the decomposition, officials estimated she had been dead for roughly a year, meaning Mr. Cruel was now no longer just a serial kidnapper and rapist, he was now a murderer. Theories have circulated as to why Carmen was killed. Her mother possibly has an explanation though. She claims Carmen was a very stubborn girl who would have fought back and wouldn't have just given up. It's possible she learned who her kidnapper was and paid the ultimate price for it. Over the years, hundreds, if not thousands of rumors about the identity of Mr. Cruel have circulated around the world. It would seem after Carmen, no more future crimes would be pinned to him. He has been potentially connected to several older crimes though, which brings me to my last and final portion of this documentary. I myself have many potential theories as to who this potential psychopath could be. Before I get into my personal theory though, I would like to note a few theories I have seen online that seem the most practical. First, in 2010, Task Force Apollo was launched. With 20 years of technological advancement, officials hoped to bring information to light. Unfortunately, much to the dismay of the task force itself, many of the case files were misfiled, unorganized, or just straight up missing. In fact, one of the vital pieces of evidence that could have led investigators to Mr. Cruel's doorstep, a piece of tape used to bind one of the victims, was missing. Police could have potentially used the piece of tape to recover DNA from Mr. Cruel, but it had disappeared while in police custody. This missing evidence and Mr. Cruel's knowledge and tactical ability made many people think he was potentially a rogue cop, which would make sense seeing as he was always seemingly one step ahead of the police. He knew where and what they would be looking for at all times, it seems. The next theory I found is a bit more interesting. In 2013, just 3 years after Task Force Apollo was launched, Robert Keith Knight was detained. Robert had made a living as a youth worker and school volunteer, but had been arrested on 2 separate occasions for a variety of crimes against children. In 1980 and 1996, Knight had been convicted for several sexual assaults on minors, and a multitude of other victims had come out of the woodwork following his convictions. This would seemingly make him a very interesting potential candidate for Mr. Cruel. The time of Mr. Cruel's assaults would coincide with his post-1980 conviction release as well, which further raises suspicions. Robert would be released from prison in 2009 after his 1996 conviction. He began to collect nude images of children and was once again charged and convicted. He leapt from a second-story prison railing to his death before his trial began. The final theory I found online is the most chilling in my opinion. In 2011, a young girl by the name of Bung Siraboon, who was just 13 years old at the time, went missing in Melbourne. She had only lived in the area for a few years and was finally getting used to her new surroundings. Many locals have whispered that this is the return of Mr. Cruel. If this is in fact the case, the horrifying thought that Mr. Cruel is still out there taking innocent girls off the street is sickening to me. There are no facts tying Mr. Cruel into Bung's disappearance, but it is a very interesting theory nonetheless. To end this video, I would like to now share my personal theory. My theory is a bit weird, but please hear me out before you cast judgment. I don't usually do this in videos, as I feel it may be a bit insensitive to the families and viewers. With that said, I noticed a very interesting theory that not many people have pointed out. The more I looked into it, the more it just kinda made sense to me. When I began searching into the case of Mr. Cruel, I watched quite a few pre-existing documentaries about him online, many of which had very interesting theories, but one particular podcast by YouTube channel Mr. Reality brought this up and I found it very fascinating. So, listen to this. The Golden State Killer was a notorious serial killer also known as the East Area Rapist in the original Night Stalker. Now, I do plan on doing a full documentary on the Golden State Killer, so I won't go too far into that story, but I will show you guys an interesting connection that may blow some minds, whether it's fact or not. In 1986, the notorious Golden State Killer would seemingly vanish after killing at least 13 people, raping upwards of 50, and committing well over 100 burglaries. But did he actually vanish? Or did he simply relocate to a new area? Somewhere far, far away from people who know his crimes. Well, a year after the Golden State Killer would vanish, the first of the Mr. Cruel attacks occurred. These attacks scarily match up with the MO of the Golden State Killer. The first attack matches up to the Golden State Killer to a T. It's honestly so similar, it's giving me goosebumps right now as I talk about it. It is reported that they both took breaks in their attacks to eat food. They both were armed with a knife and a gun. They both talked to people who weren't actually there, and they even used the same expert knots to tie up their victims. The similarities don't end there though. Mr. Cruel and the Golden State Killer wore black ski masks and long hair that would often protrude from the mask. If you look at police sketches, they are almost identical. They would both break into homes and wait to be found by the residents. They were both eerily meticulous in their crimes. And last but not least, they would both be around the same age of 60 to 75 years old, if they were still alive today. The FBI at one point looked into both killers and even contacted the Victoria Police with information about Mr. Cruel and detailed steps on how to catch him and provided crucial information about his personality and why he did what he did. Interestingly enough though, they used the same information on the Golden State Killer's profile as well, which to me seems a little bit more than just a coincidence. Despite what your theory is, Mr. Cruel could potentially still be out there. Just because he has not been heard from or caught does not mean he isn't still victimizing people. There is a new way to be a predator this day and age, an anonymous way. The FBI mentioned Mr. Cruel had strong sexual desires for children and would likely have made his own homemade movies. There are also reports from some of the girls abducted that they thought they could have heard camera noises. Meaning, he probably filmed his attacks on the abducted girls. So, he may not be hunting on the streets. He may be hunting you right at this very moment, online.
If tonight we can contribute something constructive to the explanation of these phenomena, it might be able to assure these people who have nothing to be alarmed about.
Seemingly since the dawn of humanity, unidentified flying objects have been observed in the skies above us. Whether it be ancient depictions of celestial beings coming down from the heavens, or modern-day accounts of alien abduction, the fascination of what life exists outside of our own has captivated many imaginations over generations. There are countless UFO sightings to cover, but I felt there was no better place to start than one of the world's most prolific cases of mass UFO sightings. A case of strange sounds, odd ships in the sky, and so much more. This is the unsolved mystery of the Warminster Thing. As early as the 1930s, a small town in the southwest of England known as Warminster had begun to experience some truly odd happenings. Warminster is a rather small town, a place where everyone knows everyone. Strange sightings and sounds began to be reported by residents around the area. They started few and far between, but gradually over the decades, these reports of strange objects and sounds would increase tenfold. There is a rather old TV documentary about the Warminster Thing that I have watched in preparation for this video. In this video, many residents give first-hand testimonies describing what these sounds were like. Many of them said the sounds were cracking and stark in nature. These odd events would practically go untalked about until the mid-60s, when the Warminster Thing seemingly made its debut on the grand scale. In 1965, esteemed local journalist Arthur Shuttlewood would write his first piece about the odd events in the Warminster Journal. He titled this small piece, "Bell Hill Mystery: Weird Noises on Christmas Morning." The funny thing about this article is that it was basically hidden in the middle of the page. This article shared a very detailed story told to Mr. Shuttlewood by a local woman named Marjorie By. She claimed she had woken up at around 6 a.m. or so on Christmas morning. She got dressed and began to make her way to church for Christmas Mass, and while she walked her route, she began to hear some unsettling noises in an area known as Bell Hill. Marjorie described these noises as very odd. She said, and I quote, "like branches being pulled over gravel." A couple of days after Marjorie shared this story with Mr. Shuttlewood, he would share this bizarre encounter just after the new year. As mentioned before, the story was pretty much shoved to the back page and practically unnoticeable. As history went though, this seemingly small and insignificant story would end up being the Warminster Journal's most prolific story. Not long after the publication of Marjorie By's story, many other residents began to share their own experiences. Upwards of 30 people sent in claims of hearing strange sounds that Christmas morning as well. These stories seemed to verify Marjorie's claims, and Arthur Shuttlewood began to compile all the reports he was getting over the next year. It seemed no matter where you looked on the Warminster Journal at the time, alleged encounters with UFOs and odd sounds were everywhere. The year of 1965 may very well hold the record for the most UFO reports in England's history. In the months after the initial report in the Warminster Journal, letters continued to pour in from residents who were claiming to have experienced it. Many were in conjunction with the strange sound Marjorie had heard, but strange sightings of unexplained shapes in the sky also began to surface. The descriptions of these strange figures in the sky varied from metallic orbs, saucers, and most notably, cigar-shaped spaceships. Almost always, a weird sound accompanied these sightings. These sounds were said to sound like booming or annoying droning. In some reports, people said their cars failed after seeing these odd figures in the sky. Others reported animals acting strangely while these encounters took place. For example, many residents reported dogs behaving very oddly. Some residents tried to get further proof of their experiences. Many set up cameras and tried to get pictures of these strange figures. This is always easier said than done, obviously, as if it were as easy to set up a camera and take a picture of something, the mystery of many folklore would be lost. Not many had any sort of luck with photographing what they dubbed the Thing. One resident even claimed he took pictures of the Thing, but his film would reveal a damaged, burnt film roll. essentially claiming the thing emitted energy that affected cameras. Contrary to that story though, Gordon Faulkner, who was a local factory worker who also had a hobby of taking pictures, would give Arthur Shuttlewood a picture he claimed to be of a UFO. This photo was published in the popular Daily Mirror, given permission from Gordon to, quote, do as he seemed fit with it. Gordon Faulkner would be interviewed by many reporters who wanted the scoop on how he had gotten this iconic picture. Gordon seemingly enjoyed this newfound fame and eagerly shared his information with the public. Many people, of course, questioned the validity of Gordon's picture. Editors for the Daily Mirror even stated the picture could very well be a fake. There are a few audio clips of Gordon's interviews about this picture.
Mr. Faulkner, in fact, has done much to put Warminster on the flying saucer map. This is how he got his picture.
I had a camera with me. I was taking it down to my sister who wanted to borrow it. And, well, as I say, I just had the camera with me. And pure luck, I just undid it and took a picture.
The object was staying still all this time, was it, or was it moving?
No, it was moving.
But moving slowly?
It was moving fairly fast. I wouldn't like to say how fast, but I couldn't say how fast.
Now, some people have said that when they've tried to take a picture of one of these things, there's been some mysterious force or radiation that stopped the camera from working. Did you find this?
It didn't stop my camera from working.
Have you had people say that this picture is a fake?
Of course I have, yes. I mean...
What do you say to them when they say that?
They're entitled to their own opinion. I know it's not a fake. And it doesn't really bother me what other people think.
After this buzz, things would seemingly start to die down a bit among locals, but the phenomenon continued to attract many curious tourists looking for a peek at the legendary Warminster Thing. Many UFO researchers began to show up in the area as well. The British UFO Research Association, also known as Bufora, which was a newly founded group launched just a couple of years before in 1964, had come to the area in hopes of documenting the phenomenon. At this time, though, the number of sightings began to decrease drastically. Although the phenomenon had seemed to have calmed down, the town of Warminster strongly embraced their new reputation, and residents began to open UFO-themed businesses, including a UFO bed and breakfast. This embrace of their local legend had earned them a lesser-known nickname, Roswell of the UK. Sometime in October 1967, well over 2 years after the Warminster Thing phenomenon had peaked, 2 local police officers claimed to have seen an aircraft over the town of Devon. Devon is a short drive from Warminster, roughly around 2 hours or so away, even less depending on the route you take. The officers shared their experience with reporters, and they sounded pretty convinced that what they had seen was a UFO. Here's an audio clip of that interview.
Well, the object was likened unto a cross.
Constable Willie just said, here we go then, and we drove off after it, if you know what I mean. We were travelling very fast.
No sound that I heard at all. There was no outside noise apart from the noise of the car itself.
And the acceleration away from us was terrific. So really, we didn't get under it to hear any sound.
It was definitely there. It was definitely either manned by some sort of being or remotely controlled. It was definitely being controlled to view our car.
After this, the town of Warminster would quiet down once again, with the occasional sighting here or there. Warminster would skyrocket to the world stage one more time though, in the mid-1970s. Crop circles seemingly began to appear in the region out of nowhere. At first, many would tie this to the strange phenomenon of the Thing from 1965. Others also tried to tie in the Stonehenge, which was close to the area. However, many people obviously claim these crop circles were nothing more than a publicity stunt by the residents desperate for one last sliver of attention and fortune from the Thing. However, after these crop circles, there seemingly has not been any mass sightings of the Warminster Thing. With most of the witnesses now being deceased, including Arthur Shuttlewood, the man who introduced the world to the Thing all those years ago. Arthur passed away in 1996, He wrote many books about his time and experiences which can still be read. Arthur Shuttlewood would like to claim himself as a skeptic, but said he remained a believer until the very end. Several years after the initial sightings, Arthur Shuttlewood was interviewed and shared these thoughts that you will hear in this audio clip. It really puts a lot of things into perspective for me.
Well, it certainly changed the life of one man, the local newspaper reporter Arthur Shuttlewood. Without reservation, he believed that someone or something was trying to make contact.
A lot of people, when I've recapped on their stories, they've had that same sensation that they feel better, perhaps not physically, but mentally and spiritually particularly. They want to achieve something for the benefit of mankind. I don't think I ever have, but you do get that feeling that's inculcated in you by this experience, I think.
Would it be going too far to say that you feel you've had something like a religious experience?
Yes, I don't think that would be exaggerating. You do. You seem to have a new outlook, a new mental outlook on life, and you want to help people. This is most peculiar, perhaps, and it's almost incredible to you, no doubt. But I felt that sensation. I wanted to see it again, and I wanted to convince whoever was on board that we weren't antagonistic, and we wanted to warmly welcome them if they cared to land. And of course, they have landed. They have landed now.
2015 marked the 50-year anniversary of the Warminster Thing legend. Despite half a century passing by, many UFO researchers and fans flocked to the event to show their support. Later that same year, an unknown artist painted a large mural on a concrete wall in Warminster, memorializing the event that caused so much hysteria so many years ago. Warminster, England, remains a rather small area with a long, mysterious history around it. Even until this day, local residents are uploading videos, pictures, and audio of strange lights and sounds they are experiencing in the area. Just a few years back, in June of 2017, a video was recorded by a resident that lives around Clay Hill, where several of the original encounters were reported. This video shows an odd light in the sky, seemingly repeating a circular route. At the end of the day, Warminster continues to baffle millions around the world with its seemingly never-ending source of UFO and unexplained activity. Whether you believe in UFOs or not, this case certainly holds weight in the greater investigation of UFOs and extraterrestrial life. Thanks for watching this documentary detailing the strange and unsolved events of the Warminster Thing. What do you think happened here? Is Warminster truly a hub for the paranormal, or is there some sort of natural explanation for this phenomenon? Either way, there are some truly weird things happening in the area. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us and hit that subscribe button? Turn on notifications to never miss a new video. I upload new videos almost every single day on all things natural and supernatural. If you're not aware, you can download your favorite scary stories from the swamp on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and just about every other major podcast platform. I'll see you guys soon.
I was walking from Arn Hill up to Cradle Hill, and then just past the farmhouse, I became aware of this grey thing lying in the road, and I was just absolutely dead scared, you know. It was just this fear. It was just like a fog, really, but it was perfectly outlined. It was the typical classical flying saucer that you see in photographs and so on, and it just lay there right across the road, and I just went absolutely hot. I didn't know what to make of it. It was similar to like Doctor Who's TARDIS, if like. It was half here and half not, as if it was in another dimension. But it's an incredible experience, and I don't expect people to believe unless it happens to them.
I saw this thing go over, what they call the thing, you know, and it was exactly like a railway carriage, you know, lit up. And it started up overhead there, and I saw it and watched it right out of sight, right over the hills.
But I looked in that direction, there was a silver plane, and
pink one, like between a pink and a red cerise colour then, right side by side. And they were in that direction, and there was no tape, and I don't know where it went to.
I heard this noise, it was a hell of a noise it was. And came down, you know, it was a bit misty, foggy. And it was like as if a tin can was floating nuts and bolts, you know, and somebody was rattling it.
What I did see was a green shimmering light for about a quarter of an hour.
Well, it's hard to explain. It's like a bright light with a red light in the middle.
Like cigar shape.
The strange disappearance of Zeb Quinn has left Asheville, North Carolina in a stupor for a long time. Asheville, North Carolina is a fast-growing city with a small-town vibe. Known for its many world-famous breweries, it is almost shocking to find out that there is a long, dark history of gruesome crime in this small city. Asheville holds a special place in my heart. I lived there for a few years and even went to the same high school and worked at the same Walmart as the young man we are covering in today's case. For nearly 18 years, the case of Zeb Quinn has remained unsolved. The events and timeline surrounding his mysterious disappearance are truly odd, and quite honestly, at times, pretty damn creepy. Zeb Quinn, like many other high school students his age, had been looking for a new car to drive, to school and to work. On January 2nd of 2000, at around 9 p.m., Zeb had planned on checking out a car he was thinking about buying. Robert Owens, a friend of Zeb, came along in his vehicle and followed Zeb to the lot where the vehicle was for sale. There is surveillance footage of the two teens outside a local gas station at around 9:15 p.m. This would seemingly be the last time Zeb Quinn would ever be seen.
So basically, the events leading up to his mysterious disappearance, he's going to check out this car that he is considering purchasing. His friend Robert Owens decides to tag along. What's confusing is whose car is he driving? Like, he has a car already? Is like there's something wrong with his car?
Well, who's Owens to him?
I think what happens is it's Zeb's car, and I don't remember the make and model.
And that was confirmed that it was his?
It was his.
Okay.
It was his car.
But was that the car he was looking at?
That was the car that appeared at the Mission parking lot.
Okay.
That was the one.
But how do we know that's the one he was looking at?
Wait, but like, was it like his mom's car that he was driving, or was it his car?
I think it was his car because he drove to school, I believe.
Owens claimed after the duo left the gas station, Quinn signaled him to pull over. According to Owens, Quinn had gotten a message on his pager and needed to find the payphone. This was before cell phones were prevalent. Quinn was apparently frantic after the phone call. Owens said Quinn canceled their plans to check out the vehicle, and Quinn drove off in a rush, even rear-ending Owens' car in the process. This is where the case starts to get even odder. Owens checked into the hospital later that same night claiming he had been in another car crash, which had left him with multiple fractured ribs and a head injury. This is strange due to the fact that there were no reports of the second crash. We could not find any records by officials or insurance companies. Why did he leave in a frantic rush after that page? Like, what would make him so frantic that he would crash into the back of his friend's car, potentially giving him those rib injuries, which I want to go back to? How did Robert Owens... Did he really get into another wreck that night? How did he actually get those injuries? Like, those injuries seem way more likely that he sustained under a struggle, like fight wounds, cracked ribs, head wounds. That does also coincide with, a car crash. But the way I think about it is, like, why would Zeb Quinn frantically drive off frantically and then hit his friend and not even stop and go? Like, no, most people don't just be like, oh, that's fine, cool, you hit my car.
A hit and run to somebody you're close with isn't likely.
That doesn't make much sense.
It's not likely.
Zeb Quinn has never been seen since. 2 days later, however, someone called into the Hendersonville Road Walmart, where Quinn worked, pretending to be Zeb, calling him sick. The co-worker, who had answered the phone call though, could tell that this was not the voice of Zeb Quinn. Police were alerted and instantly questioned Owens again. He admitted to calling in and pretending to be Quinn, but he claimed Zeb had told him to do so. But why? Why would Zeb have his friend call in sick for him? It seems that once again, Robert Owens is the main suspect. Owens insisted on his innocence though, and maintained that. This case so far seems like it would be a simple and obvious open and shut case. Oddly enough, this case just keeps getting more twisted. The alleged page Zeb Quinn received that caused him to stop at a payphone turned out to be very real. Zeb's aunt did send him a page that night, though it's a bit weird since they weren't very close. The page said she was having dinner with a girl Zeb very much was in love with, and her boyfriend. Rumor has it, the girl's boyfriend was very much the jealous type. Later that night, the aunt claimed her home was broken into, but nothing was stolen, although a few choice picture frames were moved around. About 2 weeks later, Zeb Quinn's car was found and recovered in a nearby hospital parking lot. This was the hospital his mother worked at. Inside his car, officials found a mix of strange things. Among these things were strange bottles, a jacket that didn't belong to Quinn, a hotel keycard that couldn't be traced, and even more odd, a live Labrador puppy. On the windshield, someone had drawn lips and 2 exclamation marks in lipstick. Zeb Quinn's mother thinks the car was put there for her to find. The belongings found inside have not been traced to anyone or used for anything significant in the case. This case remained unsolved and seemed like Zeb and his family's efforts were lost in time.
There's got to be some foul play going on here. It feels like
Something's not right.
It feels like Zeb was caught in the middle of liking a girl who had a bad boyfriend on her side. And Robert Owens is probably the fall guy, maybe, because he has a history of these violent crimes, these violent tendencies with the Food Network stars.
Another 15 years go by, and Robert Owens has once again stepped into the limelight. Owens was found with the remains of 3 people in his wood stove. Making this even more of a big deal, these people were Food Network stars Christina Codd, her husband JT Codd, and their unborn child. You might think to yourself, how would Owens have a connection with these people? Well, apparently the family had hired him to help them work on their home, and even had a strong enough trust in him to invite them to their wedding. This crime was one of the most gruesome the area had ever seen in its history. This crime sparked local investigators to take a closer look and rework the Zeb Quinn case. With Robert Owens being the #1 suspect in the Quinn case, there could be something to find elsewhere on his property. During the investigation of the Codd case, officials found fabrics and unknown fragments under a concrete layer. Unfortunately, we cannot say if these findings have anything to do with Zeb Quinn.
And apparently, I heard somewhere that there were more bodies in his backyard.
Yeah, see, the thing that, kind of really started making them look back into the Zeb Quinn thing was they found that fragment of bone under some concrete, but they couldn't, it was too small to identify any sort of DNA or anything. So it's interesting, there could be more bodies. There's not much information on it. There's really not. I've searched everywhere.
Apparently, there's plenty of bodies out in his backyard, but there could be some concreted in.
Yeah, it could be like a John Wayne Gacy kind of thing.
Yeah,
where it's just tons of bodies mixed within dirt, concrete, everything.
Robert Owens was tried for the death penalty, but pleaded guilty to avoid it and took life in prison instead. So, what happened to Zeb Quinn? Where did he go after he left in a frantic rush? Did Robert Owens really get into another wreck that night, or could those injuries be sustained from a struggle? If Owens did kill Quinn, why? Will we ever have all these questions answered? We may never know. Until this day, the mysterious disappearance of Zeb Quinn remains unsolved.
From the outside, the Pierces seemed like any other suburban family.
It was just a normal house, it really was. Everyone says the same thing.
Nearly 24 years on, neighbours still remember awaking to the blaze around 7 o'clock that morning.
My lad picked up a boulder and threw it through the window to think we could get in, but the heat was so intense, it was just no way.
What was found inside the house was horrific.
It has been a good minute since I've covered an international crime mystery. Following my recent trend of unsolved family murders, today's story is no different. Australia is a place widely known for its seemingly uninhabitable landscape. With poisonous bugs, venomous snakes, and angry crocodiles, it is safe to say trekking across this landscape can be quite the task. Of course, over the years human beings have created settlements and a sense of safety from those boogeymen of the night. But, as I often mention in these documentaries, monsters can lurk in plain sight. Sometimes they can take the form of loved ones. A while back I covered Australia's infamous Mr. Cruel case, which, even until this day, is my longest, most in-depth production I have ever made. I would highly recommend you guys check it out after this one. The boogeyman can be anyone among us, at any time, and we could never know. This case, unlike Mr. Cruel, has a suspect, and he is currently on the run. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the odd, tragic, and downright disturbing story of the Pierce family murders. Before I get into the sad and disturbing details of this crime, I would like to take just a few moments to share a few details about the Pierce family. I couldn't find too much about them or how their lives were, but I can at the very least introduce you to the family members. The Pierce family consisted of father Stuart Pierce, mother Meredith Pierce, and their 4 children, Adam, who was 11, Travis, who was 9, Carrie, who was 2, and Matthew, who was 8 at the time. The family lived in Adelaide, which is located in South Australia. The family seemed happy from the outside looking in, but they did have their fair share of troubles. I will touch on these troubles later. Now that we have an idea of who we are talking about, let's get into the story. It was January 6th, 1991, bright and early at 7:17 a.m. Firefighters had been dispatched to a home that was on fire on Jackson Street in the Parafield Garden suburb located in Adelaide. When responders got to the home, they had found out that it belonged to the Pierce family, and the home was engulfed in flames. Inside the home, responders found an absolutely grisly scene that none of them will ever forget, I'm sure. Meredith Pearce was in her bedroom tied and bound to a chair with a rag stuffed in her mouth. She was strangled with some kind of electrical cord. 3 of the 4 children were found suffocated with plastic bags over their heads. The Pierce's 4th child, Matthew, was staying at a friend's house for the night. This may have unknowingly saved his life. It was quickly determined that the family had been killed before the fire was set. There was one other member of the family missing, though. Stuart Pierce was nowhere to be found. This, of course, was a massive red flag for several reasons. This could be a sign of a targeted attack or kidnapping. Maybe this could point to Stuart himself as the culprit. Or maybe something else entirely happened. Stuart at the time was working the night shift at a BP gas station just a 15-minute drive away from his home. Stuart's shift began the previous night at around 9 p.m. and ended that morning at 6:50 a.m. That means 27 minutes before the fire was reported, Stuart was off from work, and it only takes him 15 minutes on average to get home. So, he should have been home before the fire was reported. Let's keep this in our minds as we continue forward. Stuart drove a 240K Datsun Coupe, which from what I can find, looks to be a pretty distinctive car. Stuart's car was found later that day abandoned at the Kilkenny shopping center. no one has apparently ever seen or heard from Stuart ever since. Or so he would like you to think, that is. This is when, of course, Stuart became suspect number one in the investigation. Stuart Pierce had been cited many times, much of which cannot be confirmed, but there are in fact a few solid confirmed sightings of him. It is believed by officials that friends or family have given Stuart shelter from the police in the southeast area of Australia. In 1991, there were quite a few sightings of Stuart Pierce in his hometown of Mount Gambier. He was attempting to hide out in the area, but was recognized by several locals. The most recent confirmed sighting was back in 1997 in the area of Melbourne at the Knox Shopping Centre. Now, this leaves us with not much to go on. Nearly an entire family has been slaughtered and their home burnt down to the ground with seemingly no motive. I dug around a bit and I was able to potentially find some solid reasons why Stuart Pierce decided to kill his family, burn his house down, and abandon his life for a new one. Sergeant Bob Sharp, one of the officials in charge of this investigation, confirmed that the sightings in Mount Gambier did have credence to them, though they didn't lead officials to locating Stuart Pierce. After investigating into Stuart's background, officials found that he was in dire financial trouble. His best friend, Gary Austin, had also recently committed suicide, which is thought to have taken a toll on him. Even more interesting, somewhere around 25 marijuana plants were found in an underground bunker under his home. It is unclear if the family was aware of this or not, but it would be hard not to be, I would assume. This discovery led investigators to question if a drug-related issue had come up. Did someone come to the house looking for money or drugs, and when they were denied, they decided to send a message with violent means perhaps? This is possible, but no evidence of anyone else being involved other than Stuart Pierce has ever been found. Officials speculate that Stuart could have killed the family before he left for work, and stopped by the house shortly to set it on fire after work. This could be plausible if officials didn't conduct a thorough enough autopsy. There is some evidence that would refute this entire scenario though. Meredith's sister claimed to have spoken to her around 8 p.m. that night, about an hour before Stuart would have left for work, and claims everything was fine. An hour would be enough time to kill his family though, depending on how long that phone call lasted. Now, I don't want this to seem like a hit piece on Stuart Pierce. There is potential evidence that could show his innocence as well. While I was searching for theories and potential answers to why this crime was committed, I found a few interesting posts on the Unresolved Mysteries Reddit that brought up some good points. A user by the name of Kitty Cat B brings up the point that 27 minutes would be a really short amount of time to drive home, kill 4 people, set the house on fire, and then escape without being seen by a single person. Now, to be fair, this could 100% be the case here. It wouldn't be impossible for Stuart to have carried this out with no one noticing. I do agree, 27 minutes does not seem like enough time to do so much damage. This user also brings up a big hole in the investigation. There is no evidence presented that really shows Stuart ever went home after he left work. Could this point in a direction other than Stuart? Maybe, maybe not. The possibility that Stuart Pierce could be a victim himself has popped up numerous times. There seems to be a lot of unanswered questions that could show someone else was involved. The only surviving child, Matthew, has gone on record to say he does not believe his father had anything to do with the crime. He strongly believes his father was killed and his mother was targeted for information about him. I should also state Matthew has been in and out of trouble with the law and has been heavily affected mentally by this whole situation. He has racked up a resume of charges such as burglary, drugs, and firearms, among other various things. Matthew claims he has had no contact with his dad since this crime, and his life has been undoubtedly changed from being orphaned by this gruesome turn of events. A $1 million reward has been offered for any information that will lead to the arrest of Stuart Pierce. Despite this reward, though, no one has ever come forward with information about Stuart. It has been nearly 30 years since this horrific crime was committed, and we have yet to find any solid answers. Sergeant Bob Sharp went on record to say, "It would be very difficult for someone to live off the grid for this length of time. We have his fingerprints, plus a DNA profile, and he's the subject of an Interpol red notice, but he hasn't come to our attention." He would go on to mention, "My feelings is that he's committed this terrible act, tried to shift the blame onto someone else by deliberately dumping his car in a particular location. But when that hasn't worked, he's taken his own life, and we just haven't found his body yet." This is where the story ends, for now. What truly happened here? Was this the work of a deranged father gone mad? Was this a cartel hit over drugs or money? While many of these cases I have covered have strange and odd details surrounding them, this one is easily one of the most brutal and confusing of the bunch. With everything presented to us in this case, it is hard to say Stuart Pierce did not have anything to do with this, but it's just as hard to say that he did.
What was found inside the house was horrific. Pierce's 31-year-old wife Meredith had been tied to a chair with a towel shoved inside her mouth. 3 of his children had all been suffocated with plastic bags which had been placed over their heads. All 4 of them had already died before petrol was used to set the house on fire. Police last month released these images showing what a now 56-year-old Pierce may look like. It prompted more than 20 calls to Crime Stoppers from people who believe they'd recently seen the fugitive.
Country areas of South Australia, metropolitan South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland. We're working through each and every one of those sightings.
Police continuing to speak with those close to the case, including Pierce's surviving son Matthew. He has lived a troubled life since the murder, which happened while he was at a friend's house.
We just would encourage anybody that has seen the likeness of the person of Stuart Pierce to contact Crime Stoppers. We'll follow up whatever they provide us.
It's July of 1993. Flyers go out featuring a little girl's face. 10-year-old Andrea Parsons is missing and feared abducted.
My daughter's out there. I'm not quitting until I have her back. That's all it is, the bottom line.
She was last seen buying candy at this grocery store near her home. 19 years later, it's been turned into a shopping plaza. Despite an all-out search, Andrea's body was never found.
This case began on July the 11th, 1993.
But Thursday afternoon, Sheriff Bob Crowder announced they got the man they believe abducted, sexually assaulted, and killed little Andrea.
The person arrested is Chester Dwayne Price, a 42-year-old convicted felon who was familiar with the victim.
Chester Price has always been a person of interest. He knew the victim.
Yeah, I'm sure that was him.
We showed his picture to neighbors on the street where Andrea lived. They remember him from back in the day and are happy to hear this case has finally been solved.
We always thought they would never get him.
We just figured they'd never get whoever it was, after all this time, but we're happy.
The sheriff's office says they got a break in the case last year, which shifted their focus to Chester Price. For a while, they were sure that this man, Claude Davis, was the suspect. He lived across the street from Andrea.
I don't know where the girl is. I never did ever know where she was.
Claude Davis has never been charged, but police now say he and Chester Price were friends back in 1993, and that this case is far from over.
But we still got to get a conviction in court. We possibly have some other arrests that may follow.
We live in a time where there is no shortage of controversial and upsetting topics. Whether it be a global pandemic shifting our lives drastically, or Mother Nature ravaging the southern states with multiple hurricanes in quick succession, it seems like 2020 is not going to get any better anytime soon. Something that I think has been lost since the unrest in the country began is the never-ending amounts of cold cases that remain unsolved. This number only continues to rise and likely will not stop anytime soon at this rate. Today, I wanted to talk about the disturbingly tragic, unsolved disappearance of Andrea Parsons, in hopes that we may be able to help further this case and find Andrea's remains. Whether it be one of you directly knowing something, or even just you sharing this video online with your friends and family, it all helps in putting more eyes on these otherwise unknown cases. I know many people doubt the power of these videos, but just recently, 2 cases featured on this channel exclusively have been solved. The internet holds the power of reaching millions upon millions of people across the globe. We should never understate that. I do want to mention that this case does have 2 suspects, and one of them has even been convicted for the crime. But the mystery of what truly happened to Andrea and where her remains are continue to be a mystery. Justice was not served, and Andrea's story has not been properly told. Anyways, let's jump right into this truly tragic case that desperately deserves more attention. As a through and through Floridian, I can honestly say Florida is a rather odd state when it comes down to how towns, cities, etc. are designated and ran. Port Salerno is one of those weird places in the state that isn't technically a town or a city, but rather is simply known as a census-designated place. A quick, dumbed-down explanation would essentially be that these are areas of population solely used for statistical purposes to see how they compare against incorporated cities and such. Port Salerno is a decently populated area with just over 10,000 residents as of 2010. If anyone is old enough to remember the film Gentle Giant from 1967, you may recognize some of the scenery as this movie was partially filmed in Port Salerno. The area is also very popular for its world fishing tournaments and its manatee resort that has been featured on many popular television talk shows. With all that said and done, we should have a somewhat better understanding of the area. Now, we need to jump to the year 1993 on the southeast end of 4800 block in Port Salerno. 10-year-old Andrea Gail Parsons had asked her mother's boyfriend if she could walk to a friend's house a few streets over on Flounder Avenue. She planned on meeting with her friend and walking to the Port Salerno grocery store on Salerno Road. She was granted permission and set off on her walk towards the store shortly after. 2 different witnesses claimed to have seen Andrea walking towards the store, roughly 2 blocks or so from her home. An employee at the store told the police that she had seen her and that she had purchased some potato chips and candy. She had apparently paid in change and left, assumably towards home or said friend's house. Apparently, Andrea was walking, and some people she knew drove past her, and she waved towards them. These people would later be confirmed as a co-worker of Andrea's mother. Some speculate she may have been collecting empty cans around the Commerce Avenue and Seward Avenue area at the time. Many kids today have the luxury of earning money through chores, allowances, and even via the internet. But back in the days before the world was online, collecting cans and metals were a solid way for kids to be able to make a few bucks. This would be around the time she would be last sighted. Andrea's friend said she never arrived at her house, and sadly, Andrea was quite frankly never seen or heard from again. It was as if she simply vanished. Andrea's mother, Linda Parsons, returned home from work sometime around 10:10 p.m. and rather quickly realized her daughter was not home. Linda searched the neighborhood, questioning everyone she could about the whereabouts of Andrea. The neighborhood they currently lived in wasn't the safest of areas to live in. It was notorious for drug trafficking and who knows what else. Earlier that day, Andrea's mother said she had dropped her off at the B&A flea market located on US 1. There, she would help family friend, Sherry Tate, carry boxes around. Tate, at the time, ran a small business selling jewelry and various household items. Tate would say she was close to Andrea and that she was always a big help at the booth. Andrea was described as being happy and content that day. she did not seem distressed or out of the ordinary at all according to those who saw her. Sometime around 2:40 p.m., Andrea was picked up from the market by her mother, Linda. They would go home, carve a watermelon in the backyard, and then Andrea would take a short nap while her mother got ready for her night shift at the local Winn-Dixie, which, for those of you who are not familiar, Winn-Dixie is a grocery store based in Florida that operates throughout the southern states. Linda would leave for work and kiss Andrea goodbye, leaving her home with her boyfriend, Pat Daniels, who was watching television at the time. According to Pat, Andrea would go out to rollerblade with her friend and nearby neighbor, Latonia Jones. But this skate session would be cut short after Latonia's mother told her that she needed to come inside because it was far too hot to play for so long. So Andrea would return home and ask Pat at around 5:30 p.m. if she could go out to the store and then her friend's house. Andrea was said to have stopped at Latonia's house again to see if she could join her for a walk, but her mother said no. Andrea Parsons would be reported as missing at 11 p.m. that night by her mother. After searching the area with no luck, Port Salerno police and many locals immediately suspected convicted child offender Claude Davis, who had been convicted of an unrelated case similar to this one. The reason why people suspected Claude Davis was because of how he oddly approached the police and told them that he had seen Andrea being forced into a maroon-colored car. He said this car was either from the 70s or 80s and it was an Oldsmobile. Apparently, there were 4 or 5 Hispanic-looking men. Davis would detail that a 200-pound man got out of the back seat of the car and grabbed Andrea forcefully and drug her towards the car. He said the car looked old and beaten down. They apparently stopped along a wooded lot and was estimated to be no more than 25 yards from her home. Apparently, Andrea never screamed or struggled with these assailants. This tip, though, was kept silent for over a week before police finally announced they may be looking for this group of men. Now, police did of course question and look into Linda Parsons and her boyfriend, Pat Daniels. Daniels was considered a suspect at first, and his car was searched for any sign of Andrea. Daniels would recall in the years since that the police tried to get a reaction out of him by being extra tough on him. He said they threatened to have the state take away his daughter, Nikki, from him during all of this. At the time, he was an unemployed construction worker and had run into a few issues before Andrea went missing. Daniels spent some time in prison for an auto theft back in 1991 in Nebraska. By 1993, though, Daniels had been on his way to fixing his life and taking care of his daughter. By all accounts, he treated Andrea like his own daughter as well, and she was often heard referring to Daniels as Daddy. This may have been a bit more concerning if it weren't for what Claude Davis would say at a later date. Claude said he had a dream where he saw that Andrea had died after an accidental fall on the night she vanished. He would claim he panicked and threw her body in a dumpster at Phipps Park. He didn't report this alleged event until November of 1993 though, some 4 months after Andrea went missing. The most interesting part of this though, is that investigators took this alleged dream as a fact. Another seemingly small but interesting fact is that Claude Davis actually lived across the street from Andrea Parsons at the time. The police would arrest Davis for these accusations on the charge of false imprisonment. The charges were shortly dropped thereafter due to a lack of evidence tying Davis to the crime. We have seen this happen in multiple cases in recent videos of mine. Someone confessing to something but having no evidence behind it. I know a lot of people in the comments mentioned last time that certain cases were quote-unquote obvious and had no mystery. Well, dare I say I disagree. Regardless of how obvious something may seem, it is never as black and white as that. Unfortunately, we have to follow a system, and that system is blind to the obvious. It requires facts and evidence. Even if someone says they did something, if the facts don't match, then it's not that obvious and shouldn't be regarded as such. Anyway, getting back on track here, Davis would go on to claim he had nothing to do with Andrea's disappearance, and claims his first story was the truth. When asked to take a polygraph test, he refused though, but since those tests are highly inaccurate and controversial, I don't know if I can hold any fault on anyone for turning that down. When your freedom could come down to a famously inaccurate system, I'd be unwilling to participate as well. Since Davis mentioned he dumped Andrea's body in a dumpster, officials searched through the Martin County landfill in December 1993. They would also search his home and van. This would be some 5 months after Andrea had vanished without a trace. After tireless searches, nothing was ever found. No clothing, no body, nothing. With very little to go on, it seemed the hopes of finding Andrea were slim to none. More speculation would arise as Claude Davis allegedly told his neighbor he had abducted Andrea. This of course cannot be taken as fact, but is an interesting piece of speculation to bring up. Officials would search beyond the neighborhood area, using scent dogs to search various patches of woods and along with drainage ponds. Helicopters, infrared sensors, and even divers were brought in, but no sign of Andrea was ever found. Officials mainly focus on areas just north of the Parsons home. This area has industrial parks, condos, and pretty long stretches of woods and fields. They searched the railroad tracks around the area. Mosquito Creek and Manatee Pocket were also searched to no avail. It was likely that someone Andrea did not know abducted her. Once again, the same suspect would pop up in April 1994 when Claude Davis's home caught fire. More specifically, his porch was set ablaze. Davis would claim whoever was involved with Andrea's disappearance had done this to him to silence him for sharing the story he had shared. Oddly, he was actually on probation at the same time of the fire for, you guessed it, child charges. Eventually in 1999, he was sent to prison for 9 years for violating his probation by coming into contact with his victim. The story twists even more and becomes just that much more confusing when a 42-year-old man by the name of Chester Dwayne Price was charged with the kidnapping and murder of Andrea Parsons. This was announced in November of 2012, 19 full years since Andrea had gone missing. He was located in Haleyville, Alabama, when he was arrested. Price has one hell of a rap sheet. With multiple convictions for assault, drug charges, and sex crimes, Price had allegedly been in contact with Andrea around the time of her going missing. He was also good friends with Claude Davis at the time. Oh, but there is more to this already twisted tale. Claude Davis took the stand in this case and testified that he and Price cooperated together to force Andrea into Davis's 1978 van. Andrea apparently bit Price's hand in an attempt to get away, not long after he claimed they murdered her and disposed of her body the next day. If this story were true, it wouldn't really matter that much anyway, as Davis would not face any charges for his alleged role in the disappearance of Andrea Parsons. This is because his constitutional right to a speedy trial would be violated. The state was illegally obliged to either file formal charges against him within 175 days of his false imprisonment arrest in 1993, or let him go. Officials were never able to find enough evidence tying him to these cases, and they were forced to release him. Going back to my point at the beginning of this video, people confess and claim to be a part of cases that they weren't a part of all the time. For whatever reason, there's a mindset that people can play or manipulate the police and media. Whether to gain infamy, prolong their trial, or to avoid the death penalty, it seems this is a more common thing than we like to admit, honestly. Not to also mention that our judicial system is truly broken as well. If people are confessing to a crime, evidence or no evidence, we should have the power to fully look into these matters and vet these claims. In some cases, police forces do just that and weed out the fact from fiction. But it is observed far too often that this extra mile of investigation is not taken. The last thing I could really find a connection of these two men were that they claimed many times to know where Andrea's body was, but seemingly every time they pointed out an area they claimed she was at, they never found any remains. Another man would come up by the name of Billy Brewer, who was 38 years old at the time. He claimed he joined the two men the next day to search for cans. Billy said he saw a black bag with a large object inside. Despite these accusations though, her body has never been located. In the summer of 2013, Claude Davis would die suddenly in his home at the age of 76. His death not only potentially stole the true story of what happened to Andrea Parsons, but seriously hurt the case against Chester Price, which relied heavily on the testimony of Claude Davis. Sadly, in 2014, the prosecution would give Price a plea deal and pleaded no contest to a manslaughter and kidnapping charge. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but will likely serve less than 9 years. A Martin County Police press statement said, "The investigation has concluded that Price abducted and killed Andrea Gail Parsons. Tragically at this time, her body has not been recovered." Police would decline to give any further information as to what evidence they had to charge Price 19 years later after the fact. This is where the story turns into a cold case rather than justice for all. Pleading no contest literally means the defendant does not admit guilt, but acknowledges that there is a solid enough amount of evidence against him if this does end up going to trial. So basically, these two men could have done something terrible, but got away with it because the legal system is set up in such a way that it takes far too long to get anything done. The story of what truly happened to Andrea Parsons may never be known. If these two men did kidnap and murder her, why did they do so? Was it purely an act of opportunity from two sickos? Or did something else entirely happen? I do, at the end of the day, believe police had the right people in their scopes. I just feel awful at how terribly this case was handled. Andrea had only recently moved down to the Florida area from Dayton, Ohio in 1992. She had been living with her mother, half-sister, and mother's boyfriend for less than a year in the Port Salerno area when she went missing. If you or anyone you may know has any information or tips as to who, what, or why in the case of Andrea Parsons, please submit any information you may have to Martin County Sheriff's Office at 407-220-7170. You can remain 100% anonymous. Any tips would be greatly appreciated. If you could do me a huge favor and share this story around your social media, that would be immensely helpful to this story. It would help it reach more people, and we all know it deserves that. The more people we can reach, the greater chance we have of helping further this case. I know many will doubt this, but a case from the early 60s that was only ever aired on the Swamp Dweller channel just became the world's oldest cold case ever solved with DNA testing. We can help the cause. You just have to have faith.
Let me set the scene. It is May of 1977 in a small city known as Albertville, Alabama. The area has just over 21,000 residents and is the largest city in Marshall County. Albertville is included in the greater Huntsville-Decatur area. This area was historically inhabited by the Cherokee people and held many important battles in the American Civil War. Sometime in 1908, one of the deadliest tornadoes in recorded history tore through the small town. This storm practically erased the town from existence. Getting back on track, Albertville was known as a rather safe place with crime rates being relatively low at the time. On the morning of May 15th, 1977, things would change in this allegedly safe community. Two locals were walking near Martling Cemetery and happened to notice something rather strange. They saw what appeared to be a human body. It was male. This body was not normal though. The throat was slashed violently. The torso had been covered in yellow latex paint, and several stab wounds were found on the chest. After all this, the body was then burned severely. Now when I say the throat was slashed, it was cut so severely, it was described by police as being from ear to ear. Some sort of acidic liquid had been used to burn off the fingerprints of the unidentified man. Soon after the discovery of the body, police began to create reconstructions of what the man possibly looked like to potentially help stir up clues as to their identity. Marshall County investigators publicized a photo of the man, but there never were any matches. After some time passed, The unidentified man was buried in the Arab City Cemetery, with a gravestone marked as unidentified. 30 years later, and the 30th anniversary of the cold case is aired on the local news. Just a few counties over, in Limestone County, a family sees the broadcast and the photo featured and are stricken by how it closely resembles their loved one who went missing in 1977. Dean Kellum is an Athens, Alabama resident who owns a machine shop who thinks the body may be that of his 18-year-old brother who seemingly went missing 30 years ago. Bobby Kellum was just 18 years old when he left for a trip to Talladega with his girlfriend to go watch some races at the track. I am unsure if it was a NASCAR event of some kind or something else entirely. Bobby never returned from his trip though, and according to Dean Kellum, his family just accepted the fact that he was gone. None of them seemed to know what had happened to Bobby, if he was dead or alive, and no one ever reported him as missing, even after 30 years of no contact. This part always struck me as a bit odd, and I have noticed several other people online mention the same exact thing. Why would you not report your brother, son, nephew, grandson, whoever he may be, as missing? If he had no prior history of running off and not staying in contact, this should be a cause for concern. I did find an article where Dean mentioned his brother was in some sort of trouble with the law for allegedly writing bad checks. I also found a quote from Dean Kellum, who mentions Bobby's girlfriend contacted him a few weeks after the trip and said Bobby had left her to hitchhike back home and was wondering if he made it back safely. This is one very disturbing detail in my mind. Anyway, decades would pass, and Dean Kellum would say he was 75% sure this man could be his missing brother. He would be quoted as saying, "There's a lot of resemblances, you know, in the face and the forehead and all that." After seeing the report on WHNT-TV, he contacted Marshall County officials and gave them a high school yearbook photo of Bobby Kellum. Dean and his mother, Wilma Hicks, agreed to provide DNA samples so authorities could confirm or deny this possibility. The unidentified man's body was dug up from the Arab City Cemetery, where he was buried with just a marker and a date of death. DNA samples were taken from the body and sent in to be tested. At the time, this process could take anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks to get results if tissue samples could be found in the remains. If no tissue could be found though, authorities would have to send the remains to the FBI's laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, to be tested using the nuclear DNA identification process. This process can take up to 36 months. In the meantime, former Marshall County Coroner P.T. Williams said he believes the remains are likely that of Bobby Kellum, going as far to say he was 95% sure it was him. Williams was the coroner from 1975 to 1979 and recalls examining the body in 1977 quite vividly. Williams mentioned the way the throat was cut, the man either had to be unconscious or held or tied down with great force. The local police force had a bit of an issue on their hands though. They needed to raise somewhat of $5,000 to get the remains tested. If they could not, it would take up to 3 years to potentially receive any results from the FBI. Luckily, the community as well as the local businesses around donated $4,000, and the lab agreed to give a $1,000 discount to help the case. On September 21, 2007, Marshall County Sheriff's Department released the identity of the man found murdered 30 years ago. The man was indeed 18-year-old Bobby Kellum. The story behind what happened to Bobby during his final hours of life is largely unknown. I do have some information that I was able to find that could help us better understand what happened. 3 people were identified as being involved, 2 of which have died, and 1 who was terminally ill. No charges were ever pressed, and the case was closed. Bobby Joe Kellum was 18 years old and had just begun work at the Fraternal Order of Police Fair in Anniston, Alabama. He had only worked there from May 2nd to May 14th. where he had met a 17-year-old girl who I have not been able to identify. The two spent a couple of days together and returned to Anniston on May 15th, where they apparently were picked up while walking down Alabama Highway 21 by the girl's father, DeWitt Thrash. A man named Brooks was also in the vehicle with them. The group dropped off the girl at home and told them that they were going to go drop Bobby back off at the highway or bring him home if it was close enough. Once they returned to Marshall County, the group picked up another man by the name of Barnes and drove toward Martling Cemetery. For whatever reason, when they arrived at the cemetery, DeWitt Thrash pulled a knife and cut Bobby's throat. He was likely held down by the other two men. No charges would be given, as Thrash and Barnes died in 2005, and Brooke lives out of state and at the time was terminally ill with less than 6 months to live. Unfortunately, there is only a 6-year statute of limitations to anyone involved and prevented any additional charges from being charged against Brooks. The closest thing we have to a motive is from a statement made by Marshall County Sheriff Scott Walls, who said the motive for the murder was likely due to DeWitt Thrash being upset that this man ran off with his 17-year-old daughter. Brooks, who had 6 months to live, did not want to die without getting this off of his chest. The identity of the girl has never been released due to everyone involved seeing no basis for causing further harm. That last fact slightly bothers me, as apparently the girl had been told by her father many years later about what he had done. Maybe hiding her identity is the best, but I just feel like she should have mentioned this earlier to authorities. And, unfortunately with that, the story of the unidentified remains of a man in Martling Cemetery comes to a close.
They called me from headquarters early that morning and told me that the scouts up here had found a dead girl. And when I got here, to my surprise, there was three, and it was a homicide.
2 of the girls were from Tulsa, and 1 of the girls was from Broken Arrow. And I think it sort of shocked the entire area, you know, that 3 Girl Scouts could come out here for a peaceful encampment and be sexually murdered.
One of the fondest memories I have as a kid is camping with my friends and family. I was never in the Boy Scouts, unfortunately, but I had my fair share of outdoor adventures growing up. Some of the best memories of your life can be made during the summer while away at camp. Though it does seem that not every story from summer camp ends in fond memories that last a lifetime. Some stories are memorable for a more sinister outcome. Camp Scott is a Girl Scout camp located not far outside of Locust Grove, Oklahoma, in Mayes County. In 1977, the camp was celebrating its 49th year as a camp, and spirits were high. Camp Scott is situated on 410 acres of land with multiple creeks running through it. Highway 82 is not too far from the area as well. Now that we are acquainted with the area a bit, let's get right into the tragic and disturbing story of the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. June 12th, 1977, marked the first day of camp for the Camp Scott Girl Scouts. That same day around 6 p.m., a nasty thunderstorm hit the area. All the girls went to their tents and tried to stay dry and warm. Among the campsites there were 7 tents for the Scouts, a kitchen and shower, and a tent for the counselors, as well as a campfire. The campsite in particular we are going to be focusing on is the Kiowa site. Among the Scouts at this site were Michelle Gusay, Lori Lee Farmer, and Doris Milner. The 3 were sharing tent number 7 on the furthest edge of the site. Sometime during the night, tragedy would strike. The next morning, a counselor walking a trail came upon the 3 girls dead in their sleeping bags, their bodies placed at a fork in the trail. Before I go any further, I must note that 2 months prior to the camp opening for camping season, a camp counselor had reported that her belongings had been ransacked and oddly enough, her donut stolen. Inside the donut box was a note though. This note has inspired many crime movies and TV shows, like American Horror Story's recent season. The note read that the author vowed to kill 3 campers. This was of course discarded and thought to be a joke, as summer camps are usually full of ghost stories, pranks, and generally comedic times. Now, getting back into the story, June 13th, 1977 would not only mark the darkest day in Camp Scott history, but it would also mark the last day the camp would ever be open. After just under 50 years of operating as a Girl Scout camp, the area remains abandoned and empty, even today. After a counselor was on her way to the showers, she discovered the bodies of Michelle, Lori, and Doris. Counselors quickly found one of the tents had been cut with a knife. The girls were found to be violated and died from strangulation. Their bodies were left out in the open, less than 150 yards from help. A rather large red flashlight was found on top of the campers' bodies. A fingerprint was found on the lens, but it seems it has never been linked to anyone. A bloody footprint from a 9.5 size shoe was also found in the tent. It seems the previous 2 red flags were written off at the time. I guess I can see why they would be. There are more alarming clues that would be written off though, that really concern me. Apparently, a counselor in another unit not too far from the Kiowa site saw what looked like to be a dim flashlight moving through the woods sometime between 9 or 10 p.m. This is obviously a bit concerning due to how remote the area was, but being as cell phones and the like were not really around, there wasn't much anyone could do to verify who that light belonged to. Now this next part should be taken with a grain of salt, as I could not verify this next piece of speculation. But from what I've read via a post on the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit, a counselor from the Kiowa site apparently reported that they also saw a dim flashlight approaching their direction at around 1 or 2 a.m. This person was approaching the area very slowly according to the claim. I couldn't find the article this user claims they read this in though, but honestly, I really feel terrible that the counselors, who were mainly around the age of 18 at the time, had no real way to defend their campers. The last concerning thing I would like to mention that seemingly was overlooked in this case was that in the early morning hours, the 2 Kiowa site counselors were awoken by some commotion going on in one of the tents. They heard a guttural sound, likely one of the girls being killed or violated. The counselors were startled but brushed it off as an animal or something like that. It is often brought up that if even one of the counselors went and checked on the noise, that maybe a life could have been saved. I do personally find this to be a bit unfair, seeing as most of the counselors were just kids themselves.
His mother's property was very, very close to the Girl Scout camp location, the Camp Scout location. And in this massive effort to uncover evidence, part of it would have involved items that were taken from the Girl Scout camp the same night as the homicides occurred. Some of these were found in a location called the Cellar Cave, and the Cellar Cave was attached to Gene Hart during that period of time as a hiding place while he had escaped through there was a witness who had put him there. But there was also physical evidence in the cave that not only tied him to the cave, the Cellar Cave as it was referred to, but also in that sense tied him to the items that had been taken during the same evening or night of these crimes.
There was a suspect that came to attention of authorities. This suspect's name was Gene Leroy Hart. He had been at large since escaping the Mays County Jail in 1973. He had been on the run for nearly 4 years after being convicted of kidnapping and violating 2 pregnant women, as well as 4 counts of first-degree burglary. Gene Hart was born and raised only about a mile away from Camp Scott. Gene was of Cherokee descent and was eventually arrested at the home of a local Cherokee medicine man. He was put on trial in March 1979. Although local perception seemed to be skewed about Gene's involvement, even though the local sheriff pronounced that Gene Hart was 1000% guilty, a local jury acquitted him of the charges. Later that year in June, Gene Hart collapsed and died while working out in the prison exercise yard. In 1989, DNA testing had been done, and it found 3 of the 5 probes matched the DNA of Gene Hart. This doesn't mean Gene was the killer, though. This would mean Gene was one of 7,700 potential people that could have committed the crime, which is why these DNA tests were found inconclusive. In 2008, a new set of DNA testing was conducted on the stains found on a pillowcase. These results sadly proved inconclusive because the samples were too deteriorated to obtain a DNA profile. Just recently, in 2017, somewhere around $30,000 was raised by the local sheriff, Mike Reed, in order to do new DNA testing with the stronger technology we have available today. Unfortunately, I have not been able to find any results from these tests. It would be unfair to mention that many do think Gene Hart may have had something to do with it, but he did not act alone. Many speculate that the crime scene shows that one person could not have done this. I also see the counter-argument that a full-grown man wouldn't have too much trouble subduing young girls between the ages of 8 and 10. Either way, the killer remains at large and is potentially free to strike again. Sadly, this is where the story comes to an end. At least for now. That is, Richard Gusay, Michelle's father, has gone on to help the state legislature pass the Oklahoma Victims' Bill of Rights. He also was one of the founders of the Oklahoma Crime Victims Compensation Board. Sherry Farmer, Lori's mother, founded the Oklahoma chapter of Parents of Murdered Children, which is a support group for families struggling with the loss of a child. At the end of the day, this is a tragic and violent crime that should have never happened. No matter who you believe did this crime, it is almost impossible to not stop and scratch your head. How could so many red flags go so ignored by the camp staff? How could anyone possibly want to hurt innocent children? It is all so sad, and the families of these 3 young girls deserve closure for their pain. If you have any information or tips that could help authorities further this case, please send them in to Mays County Sheriff's Office. You can find links to information on this case and contact details in the description down below.
The OSBI, the lead agency in this investigation, refuses to comment on this case because it is still considered open. However, the agency has never made another arrest.
I was asked the question, now are you going to go out and try to find the real person? And of course, they try to explain, well, based on what I know about the case, based on the evidence, they had the real person,
I don't believe any DNA testing was used for court purposes prior to 1987.
A decade after the trial, investigators still wanted answers about Hart. They hoped a new technique called DNA testing might help. 3 of the 5 tests run on material found at the scene matched Hart's DNA, but still, it was not enough to be conclusive.
I often contemplate what life was like before the 1990s. What I mean by this is I truly wonder how much crime and terrible things were committed with no chance of justice. Nowadays we have DNA, CCTV, and tons of other resources to catch just about anyone doing just about anything. But what do you think it was like back in the 1800s? No reliable phones, no internet, nothing to help you contact the outside world. It isn't often I cover stories from this far back. In fact, I think the Kentucky meat shower may be the only other video covering a story from the 1800s on my channel. Unlike mysterious meat raining from the sky though, this mystery holds a more sinister and nefarious truth. This is the story of the Bender family, an apparent family of serial killers. This is the truly disturbing mystery behind the Bloody Benders, America's first family of serial killers. To begin this story, I will first need to set up a bit of background. The Bender family lived in a very rural area known as Labette County, Kansas. They had been a part of the movement of families to the west in the New World.
The family consisted of Father John Bender, who was 60, his wife Elvira Bender, who was 55, his daughter Kate Bender, who was 23, and his son John Bender Jr., who was 25. There are a few details that seem to be a bit shrouded in doubt about the family composition, though. Some reports say that John Bender Jr. and Kate Bender were siblings, and others say that neighbors reported them as being married. From what I could find, there's nothing confirming this marriage, which makes others speculate it could have been a common law marriage, which would have been undocumented. This is, of course, only if they were married though, which we could really lean either way at this point. There seems to be endless folklore and legends surrounding the Bender family, so it is hard to separate the fact from the fiction. In this video, I will do my best to give you the most accurate and straightforward depiction of what is claimed to have happened. Sometime in October 1870, 5 families of spiritualists settled in and around the small township of Osage, roughly 7 miles or so from what is now known as the city of Cherryvale, which was established some 7 months after Osage. One of these 5 families included the Benders. They had registered 165 acres of land right beside the Great Osage Trail, which at the time was the only open road leading to the west at the time. The family got to work rather quickly building a cabin, a barn with a horse corral, and a well for water. The following year in 1871, Elvira and Kate arrived at the cabin, and it was turned into a dual space. They cut the room in half with a wagon cover, using the front half of the cabin as a general store, selling a few dry goods. Among these goods were oats and other grains. The front was also used as a kitchen, where the family would cook for travelers and even have them spend the night. The family had planted and tended to a rather sizable 2-acre vegetable garden, and also planted an apple orchard. Needless to say, the Benders had created somewhat of an oasis in the middle of nowhere, or so it would seem from the naked eye. Here's where things get really strange and slightly confusing. The family itself has literally no documentation, it seems. Where they came from has been up for debate for decades. The most popular theory is that they were from Germany, but other reports claim the Netherlands could be their origin. John Bender was an older man at the time. Being 60 years old and speaking very little English made it very hard for him to adapt and communicate. When John did speak, though, it was described as being very guttural and, more often than not, unintelligible. John also went by the name of William, according to the Emporia News. Reports get a bit muddy about John. Some sources report John Bender isn't even his real name, but it is actually John Flickinger. Now, I can't find any solid sources on this claim, so I would take it with a grain of salt. Elvira Bender is where reports get even muddier, but creepy as hell. Elvira apparently didn't speak fluent English either, but was better spoken than her husband. Elvira seemed to have a reputation of not being the nicest person, even being referred to as a she-devil by their neighbors. According to some old newspapers I found, Elvira was apparently actually born Almira Hill Mark in the Adirondack Mountains. She apparently married a man named Simon Mark, who she had a whopping 12 children with. She would go on to marry another man named William Griffith, and apparently many other men who she would go on to kill. Rumors say that she killed multiple husbands. None of this is confirmed to my knowledge, though. John Bender Jr. spoke fluent English, but had what much thought to be a German accent. Apparently, John Jr. was known to break out into a burst of aimless laughter at various times, leading many locals to think he may not have been all there. Kate Bender was a very attractive young woman. She spoke perfect English with little to no accent. She was a self-proclaimed healer and psychic, and would pass out flyers promoting her services. she claimed to have the power to cure illness, conduct seances, and even taught spiritualism. Kate had gained a lot of popularity in the area. While her parents would stay away from people, her and John Jr. would often attend Sunday services at the church and be seen in town. Locals are reported to have quoted Kate as promoting free love, which sounded a lot more like incest to me. A quote from Kate's lectures: "Shall we confine ourselves to a single love and deny our natures their proper sway? Even though it be a brother's passion for his own sister, I say it should not be smothered." Many speculate that John and Kate were not actually siblings, but a married couple. This is where I will end my look into the questionable background of the Bender family. Now, I will begin the truly disgusting events that took place on the Bender property. In May 1871, the first of many bodies would be discovered. The body of a man simply known as Jones was found with his skull crushed and his throat cut. He was found in Drum Creek. Initially, people suspected the owner of the creek, but it seems no action was taken. About a year later, in February 1872, 2 more bodies of unidentified men had been found with nearly identical wounds. By the following year, in 1873, reports of missing people who had been traveling through the area had become so common that people were beginning to avoid the trail entirely. It didn't help that the trail was already known for horse thieves and other villains. Oftentimes, officials would arrest someone for the crimes but would let them go not too long after. It is said many innocent people were driven out of the area by these suspicions. This unsolved spree of killings would not last forever, though. In the winter of 1872, the 2 travelers, known as George Newton Longcore and his infant daughter Mary Ann, left the town of Independence, Kansas. Their goal was to move to Iowa and start a new life. Sadly, they would never be heard from again. In the spring of 1873, esteemed Dr. William Henry York set off to look for the missing man and this child. Dr. York was a neighbor of the 2 and had questioned many homesteaders who lived along the trail he had known them to take. Dr. York looked far and wide and eventually made it to Fort Scott. The doctor began his journey back home on March 9th, but like many before him, he would never return or be heard from again. This is where the gruesome story of what happened to all of these people would begin to come to light. Dr. York had 2 brothers, both of whom had prominence at the time. Alexander York was a member of the Kansas State Senate, and Colonel Ed York was an esteemed military officer. Both of Dr. York's brothers were aware of his travel plans, and when he failed to return home, an all-out search began for the missing doctor. Ed York would lead a search party of 50 or so men. They questioned every traveler they came across on the trail and visited every homestead they could locate. Finally, on March 28, 1873, Ed York and his search party had arrived at the Bender family inn. Ed had explained to the Benders that his brother had gone missing and had asked if any of them had potentially seen anything. Oddly, the Benders admitted to seeing Dr. York and even said he had stayed with them. They claimed he had left and potentially had issues with Native Americans. Ed had agreed that this could be a possible explanation and even stayed for dinner. This would seem to be a close call for the Benders. Their arrogance would begin to display in this time, which is likely what ended their reign of terror. On April 3rd, Ed York would return to the Bender Inn with armed men when a woman fled from the inn and claimed Elvira threatened her with knives. Elvira played the no-speak English card, and her children denied the claim adamantly. When York doubled down on his claims, Elvira apparently became full of rage and said the woman was a witch and had tried to curse her coffee. She then made the men leave, and for the first time, she truly showed her understanding of the English language, which was reportedly much better than she let on. As York was leaving, Kate asked him to return alone the following Friday night, and she would use her clairvoyant abilities to help him find his brother. The men in York's search party were entirely convinced the Benders and a family close by known as the Roaches were guilty and wanted to hang them all, but York insisted that evidence must be found first. It would be a real shame to hang innocent people. At the same time, communities around the Osage area began to point fingers at each other. A meeting was held by the township in the local schoolhouse. Upwards of 75 locals attended the meeting, including Ed York, John Bender, and John Jr. After the announcement and the discussion of the disappearances, including that of Dr. York, it was mutually agreed a search warrant would be obtained to search every homestead between Big Hill Creek and Drum Creek. Despite Ed York's strong suspicions toward the Bender family, since his visit weeks earlier, no one had seemingly thought to watch them, and it was not noticed for several days that they had fled the Osage area. About 3 days after the township meeting, Billy Toll was driving cattle past the Bender property. He noticed the inn was abandoned and the animals were left unfed. Billy would notify the township trustee, who would not have the chance to investigate the property for a few days due to the poor weather. The township trustee would call for volunteers, where several hundred turned out to form a search party that included Ed York himself. When the party arrived at the inn, they found the cabin was empty and devoid of food, clothing, and personal possessions. It was as if the Bender family had never existed. A horrid odor was coming from the floor under the cabin. After moving the bed, they had found a trap door with an empty room underneath. The door was nailed shut, and after being opened, the search party discovered a 6-foot by 7-foot room with clotted blood on the floor. The stone slab was smashed up by a sledgehammer, and no bodies were found in the room. The smell was assumed to be blood that was soaked into the floor and dirt. The men then lifted the cabin, and dug underneath to search for bodies. Again, no bodies were found under the house, but the Benders' murderous secret would not stay hidden for long. The search party began to probe the ground all around the cabin, and eventually came across the vegetable garden, which seemed to have been recently disturbed. Dr. York's body was found that evening buried face down with his feet barely under the dirt. The probing continued into the night, where upwards of 9 more graves were found. Another body was found in the well, alongside various body parts, which is hard to say if they belonged to the existing victims or new ones, but it is believed that they belonged to new ones. All but one victim had their heads smashed in and their throats cut. According to newspapers at the time, all victims had been brutally mutilated. A body of a young girl was also found, but no injuries could be determined. It is thought she may have been strangled or buried alive. To show respect to these victims, I will list out the known or suspected names of the victims, as well as a quick rundown of the apparent timeline of the murders. Mr. Jones. His body was found in May 1871 in Drum Creek. His skull was crushed and throat cut. 2 unidentified men, bodies were found in February 1872. Their skulls were crushed and throats cut. Ben Brown was found in the Bender's apple orchard. He died sometime in 1872 and had the same injuries as the rest of the victims. W.F. McCrotty went missing in 1872 with his wagon and horses. His body was found buried in the orchard. Henry Mackenzie went missing in December 1872 with his horses. Johnny Boyle was reported missing in December 1872. His horse and expensive gear was gone too. His body was found in the Bender's well. George Newton Longcore and Mary Ann. George and his 18-month-old daughter were found in December 1872 as well. Dr. William York. After seeking out answers for George and Mary Ann, Dr. York went missing in 1873, sometime in May. He was found in the apple orchard. John Greery. His body was found in the orchard and his time of death is unknown. Unidentified male. Remains were found in the orchard. Further details are unfortunately unknown. Unidentified female was also found in the orchard, much as the last info is scarce. Various body parts. Many body parts were found as well, and none of them seemingly belonged to the existing bodies. It is believed there could be up to 3 more victims that belong to these parts. 4 unidentified men. During the search party found the bodies of 4 more men in Drum Creek. Their throats were cut and skulls crushed. One of the men could be Jack Bogart, whose horse was sold to a friend of Jack's by the Benders. Ultimately, the death toll was thought to be around 20 or so. Aside from a few, most of the bodies were never claimed and were reburied at the bottom of a hill roughly 1 mile away from the Bender home. This area is now known as the Bender Mounds. After searching the cabin further, 3 hammers were recovered: a shoe hammer, a claw hammer, and a sledgehammer, all of which matched the wounds on the victims. The hammers were displayed in a Bender murder museum from 1967 to 1978 in Cherryvale, Kansas. You can still see the hammers though. They are displayed in a nice display at the Cherryvale Museum. A knife was apparently found as well, hidden within a mantel clock. It was a 4-inch blade and can be seen by request in the museum. It still shows the blood on the blade. This next part is fairly sad, but accurate representation of just how barbaric our early form of justice was. A friend of the Bender family, a man named Brockman, was accused of knowing information about the killings. He was hung from a beam in the barn until unconscious, and then he was revived and roughly interrogated to spill any information he knew. Then he was hung again. After being hung 3 times until nearly dead, he was released and was described as staggering home as if he were drunk or deranged. I mean, after being nearly killed 3 times, I bet we all would be a bit off balance and frantic. A Roman Catholic prayer book was found within the home with various notes written inside. The text read, Johanna Bender, born July 30th, 1848. John Gebhard came to America on July 1st, 18. ? Big Slaughter Day, Jan 8th, and Hell Departed. Most are still unsure what these meant, but it is assumed they were some sort of cipher or schedule. Now, what happened to the Bloody Benders? Did they really escape and vanish into the sunset? Well, not quite, at least according to the reports that are out there. Detectives are said to have followed wagon tracks on the Benders' wagon and found it abandoned outside the city limits of a place called Thayer. Thayer was a roughly 12-mile journey from their home. It was confirmed that the Benders took a train from Leavenworth, Lawrence, and Galveston Railroad toward Humboldt. At Chanute, John Jr. and Kate left the train and caught the MK&T train going toward the south to Red River near Denison, Texas. From there, it is thought they traveled to an outlaw colony located by the border region between Texas and New Mexico. They were not tracked due to how dangerous it was for lawmen to enter the region. Later on, a detective would claim that he had traced the siblings to the border, where he claimed John Jr. had died of apoplexy, commonly known as a stroke now. According to this detective, John and Elvira Bender had continued on north to Kansas City, where they purchased train tickets for St. Louis, Missouri. These are unconfirmed, of course, as the Bender family was never found. There were many sightings of the Bender family, as well as claims of vigilantes that had killed them. Some of the notable claims were from a group of travelers who claimed to have caught the Bender family and hung them, later discarding their bodies in the Verdigris River. Another claim came from a different group that claimed they had a shootout with the Bender family and buried their bodies in the prairie. Despite all of these claims and rumors though, no one ever came forward to claim the $2,000 reward. This would be somewhere around $54,000 as of today. An interesting tidbit to add is that in 1884, it was reported that an elderly man who looked somewhat like John Bender was arrested in Montana for a murder committed near Salmon, Idaho. The victim in this attack had been killed from a blow to the head. A request for identification was sent to Cherryvale, but the man in custody severed his foot in an attempt to escape and bled out. By the time an official got to the area, the body was too far decomposed to be identified. As I mentioned earlier, John Bender may have been known as John Flickinger, and oddly enough, a man with that exact name was said to have committed suicide near Lake Michigan. Like just about everything else with this family, this is unconfirmed. The last claim I wanted to mention was that in 1889, it was reported that Elvira and Kate Bender were arrested in Niles, Michigan. I often see this misreported as Detroit in articles I have read on the subject. They were arrested for theft, but were released and found not guilty. They were arrested again shortly after and were accused of being the Bender family. From what I can find, they denied the accusation strongly, but after being worn down by officials, they began making accusations that each other was the real Bender and they were but an innocent bystander. Eventually, the two would be put on trial, and evidence proved the woman claimed to be Kate was in fact married in Michigan at the time of the murders. An affidavit produced by a daughter of the woman accused to be Elvira would show that she was married to a completely different man with an entirely different family, though many still believe this was truly Elvira Bender. With a lack of evidence against the two women, they were released and never charged. Many people still doubt their identification as the Benders, though. This is where the story, I guess, ends. At the end of the day, no one really knows what happened to the Bloody Benders, America's first serial killing family. I truly wonder what would drive a group of people to kill so mercilessly. It just seems so violent for seemingly little reward. Maybe they were truly the devils they were thought to be by the locals. When I found this case the other day, I knew I had to cover it. It's not every day you find a piece of history like this that truly just shows how different our world was not that long ago. Thanks for listening to this documentary on the Bloody Benders, America's first serial killing family. This was such an interesting story that I knew I had to cover it. I know I don't normally cover stories this far back, but it's always fun to cover some creepy history. If you guys enjoyed this, please be sure to hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us by hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day on all things natural and supernatural. What do you think happened to the Bloody Benders? Do you think they ran away and lived the rest of their lives peacefully? Do you think they were actually caught and somehow got away with it? Do you think some of those vigilantes actually ended up killing them? I'd love to know your thoughts down below in the comments.